A man named Li Hai came to the scene to speak out on behalf of his comrades. All this took place at the country estate of the Meng family, where a funeral procession was taking place and many people had gathered. Li Hai was a member of the Perfection group and was glad that he managed to arrive before the closing of the coffin of the deceased. The girl, who was dressed smartly, immediately recognized the Perfection group. It turned out that this was the eldest granddaughter of the Ming family named Meng Xin-er, and she really did not like this attitude towards her only deceased grandfather. Lin Meiqi, Shin'er's mother, grieved over the death of her father because he left all the family's affairs on their fragile shoulders. Some family members were also unhappy with Li Hai's behavior, while others remembered that the Mengs were the main competitor of the Jiao group. The guys nearby were talking about rumors that the Meng family had become close to the Wang family, so they assumed that Li Hai came here under this pretext. The daring man was sure that the family had only a few days left after the death of their leader. He warned that his people had already surrounded the place and recommended that they give him an invitation to the banquet. At this time, a mysterious man in traditional clothing approached Li Hai's allies, so he immediately attracted attention. One of the guys thought that it was a homeless person who had come to collect garbage here and asked the stranger to get out of here as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the stranger grabbed the guy's hand and squeezed it tightly. Meanwhile, Li Hai already wanted to go to Madame Meng to personally search her and find an invitation. Suddenly, a guy appeared behind the man and was flying straight at him. As a result, the young man was unable to correct the trajectory of his flight and crashed headfirst into his boss. The giant also could not stay on his feet from such a blow, so he fell helplessly to the ground, and Lady Meng was now safe. Li Hai raised his head and immediately tried to find the unexpected attacker with his eyes. Then he saw in front of him a self-confident young man with a cheeky grin on his face. The guy asked if this was the Meng family's house, which he was looking for. Li Hai began to get seriously nervous and could not understand what was happening and where the stranger was going about the affairs of all his subordinates. Our hero pointed behind him and replied that all those guys were left on the street. All the fighters of the Perfection group were lying on the ground and could not move due to the wounds that the strange young man had inflicted on them. Li Hai did not wait any longer and decided to rush into battle himself to make it clear to the main character that he had messed with the wrong person. The guy only needed one good slap in the face to stop the strong man. As a result of such a blow, Li Hai flew far to the side, and our hero did not tense up at all from such an attack. Meng Sinner was not friendly to the appearance of a young man she did not know, so she immediately asked who he was. The main character approached the coffin with Mr. Meng and expressed his regret that he did not have time to save his grandfather. He carefully examined the body of the deceased and immediately noticed some important and interesting detail on his body. The guy concluded that the grandfather was actually poisoned. Our hero decided to try to correct this situation and took out an acupuncture needle. Family members, of course, wanted to stop the stranger when he reached into their grandfather's body, but the guy was not going to listen to them. The young man concentrated energy in a needle and stuck it directly into the forehead of the deceased. The medicine man of the Meng family watched this process from the side and was surprised by such an unexpected step on the part of the guy. The man immediately learned that the main character was using a life-giving needle. Suddenly, the seemingly dead Mr. Meng came to life and began to cough violently. Meng Sin-er and her sister were shocked that our hero was able to bring their grandfather back to life. Li Hai's allies did not expect such a turn of events at all, so they began to quickly run away because they were truly afraid of Mr. Meng. The main character was glad that he could come to the aid of his grandfather just in time. The family's healer came up to measure the gentleman's blood pressure and was surprised because the man looked as if he was 20 years younger. Grandfather Meng himself also could not understand what had happened to him, so he asked whether the doctor could still save his life. The medicine man explained that it was the work of a young man and noted that he never thought that he would witness the use of this technique. Mr. Meng looked at his savior and immediately recognized Xiao Chen, who explained that he had just arrived to visit his grandfather. Now, the events are transferred to 3 days ago, when the main character was still in the mountains and diligently training. Suddenly, the energy reached such a level that it rose into the sky in a bright and strong stream. Our hero was happy because after so much training, he was finally able to reach the foundation level. The guy's teacher praised his efforts and now released his student, because the man had nothing else to teach the main character. The young man was glad to finally come down from the mountains to take revenge on the Su family and return what was rightfully his. The master also emphasized that if Meng Hao had not sheltered the guy after being expelled from the Su family, our hero would not be standing here now. He asked the student to come down from the mountain and respond to good with good, and not with hatred for hatred. Now events returned to the main estate, where the head of the family laughed merrily because he could not get enough of meeting the main character. The grandfather said that he adopted the guy by pure chance because of a fortune teller who told him that our hero could save the Meng family. The young man smiled wholeheartedly and thanked his savior for the opportunity to study on the mountain. At this moment, Mr. Meng reminded the guy about the agreement, under which the main character promised to become his granddaughter's partner. The girl's mother loudly slammed the kettle on the table and emphasized that a lot of time had passed since that moment, so this conversation made no sense. She also added that Xin took care of all the family's affairs while the man was away from his place. The woman did not want to give her daughter to a simple hillbilly, and the main character himself also decided to support this decision because it was made in childhood. Mr. Meng did not like this behavior of his children, so he slammed his hand on the table so that they would all finally shut up. He could not understand the indignation on the part of his own daughter, because he believed that he was strong and worthy enough. Only now did the woman understand why her father had such respect for what seemed like a simple boy. She put all the puzzles together and concluded that Su Chen's teacher was the master from the mountain. Meanwhile, Mr. Ming decided to ask our hero why he refused an alliance with his granddaughter. Su Chen tried to explain something and say something in defense of his side, but the man was already too angry due to the destruction of his plans. Grandfather decided to act radically, so he asked Xin to personally come to the room for a serious conversation. He thought that the guy simply hadn't seen the beauty for several years, which is why he was now acting so strangely. After some time, the real beauty Meng Xin entered the room, and she immediately asked her grandfather why he called her. Mr. Meng did not say anything to his granddaughter. He took her hand and quickly pulled her towards the main character. Su Chen, in truth, did not recognize his guardian's granddaughter at the funeral and now looked at the lovely girl with respect. Mr. Meng again asked our hero's opinion about his granddaughter, who was a real beauty. In the end, he sat Xin down at the table, explained about the engagement agreement with the main character, and invited them to sign today. Meng Xin was very surprised by her grandfather's unexpected decision and asked again if she understood his words correctly. Our hero calmly continued to sit in his place and, without saying a word, looked intently at the girl. Finally, the beauties examined the guy and emphasized that he had changed a lot since their last meeting, and then asked how Su Chen managed to save his grandfather. The young man gave her a charming smile and replied that it was all a big secret. Ming Xin laughed heartily at this answer from the protagonist. After such a short conversation, the girl made some conclusions for herself, so she abruptly stood up from the table. Next, the event will be moved to the street near another large building. Surrounded by the Meng family, Su Chen and Meng Xin stood in front of a woman who handed them a small document and congratulated them. Having opened the small red book, you can now see a joint photo of the newlyweds. Mr. Meng congratulated them on their wedding, and our hero looked at the certificate in his hands and could not say a word. Meng Xin saw the guy's uncertain expression and asked with a smile if it was he who wanted this marriage so much. One grandfather rejoiced at this event and now looked forward to the newlyweds giving him a great granddaughter. Su Chen really couldn't think that his first thing after descending from the mountain would be to marry Mr. Meng's granddaughter. Our hero assessed the situation and in the end thought that this would only benefit him. Meanwhile, the mother grabbed her daughter by the hand to scold her for such a hasty and unjustified decision. She believed that Su Chen simply fell on their heads, so he was not worthy of such a fate, but Meng Xin herself was perfectly aware of her actions. The girl explained that although the grandfather survived, such a critical situation could still happen again. It would be nice for the Meng family to have such a talented person nearby who could continue to treat Grandpa. Meanwhile, the main character and Mr. Meng were talking lightheartedly about the cute photo of the guy with Meng Xin. In the end, the mother came to terms with her daughter's decision because she had been independent since childhood, but promised to get rid of the hillbilly sooner or later. Mr. Meng also decided to give our hero the opportunity to help his granddaughter in managing the company. He promised to find a place for the guy and offered what he thought was a small salary of 300,000. Although for Su Chen himself it was a lot of money. Our hero thanked his grandfather and also thought about the fact that the poison in the old man's body had not yet disappeared, and the villain would soon appear again. The next day, Su Chen was already sitting at his new workplace and talking about how he got involved in something so quickly after descending from the mountain. The guy looked out the window and thought about who could have poisoned his grandfather, and also planned to stock up on quality medicine, for which he wanted to find Dr. Li. His train of thoughts was interrupted by Mrs. Meng, who burst into the office and expressed hopes for the young man's abilities. Suddenly, she walked up to the table and placed a check in front of Su Chen. Thus, the woman wanted to thank the main character for saving her father and give the guy 5 million. But she also asked him to take this money and just forget about the Meng family. The guy took the check in his hands and now tried to explain that Madame Meng had misunderstood him and called her aunt. The woman was very outraged by such disrespectful attitude towards her from a simple hillbilly. The main character did not say anything and with a smile on his face defiantly tore up the check with such a large amount. The woman was shocked by such audacity of the young man because she had previously thought that he was easy to bribe. Meanwhile, Su Chen threw the remaining pieces of paper into the air and declared that he did not care about money. Mrs. Meng realized that the guy was not so stupid and knew that he could get a lot more money from the family, but the woman was ready for such a turn of events. Then she called Secretary Liu and explained to our hero that he must do his part to remain in his place. An employee named Liu Hanyun informed that all the documents had already been prepared. Madame Meng said that Tian Kai Company owed them 10 million, but Xin still couldn't get around to this situation, so now her assistant must deal with it himself. She put all the documents in front of the main character and ordered to deal with this problem as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Secretary Liu wondered what the guy had done wrong, because the person who last time went to collect this debt returned in a terrible state and ended up in the hospital. Su Chen did not just give up and stated that he also has his own conditions, so if he wins the argument, the woman will have to bow to him when they meet. The woman was very angry because the young man again allowed himself to call her auntie, but she agreed to such conditions. As a result, Mrs. Meng was unable to achieve her goal, so she turned around dissatisfied and left the protagonist's office. Su Chen looked after her in surprise, and then turned his attention to Secretary Liu. He addressed her as a lady, and the girl could not understand whether the guy was addressing her. As it turned out, Su Chen felt that she often encountered pain in her lower abdomen, and her menstrual cycle was irregular. The employee was very embarrassed and asked how the main character found out about her problems. Then, the young man offered the girl a set of massage techniques that would definitely help her with pain. For 8,000, Liu Hanyun called our hero a scoundrel, and he said that we could calmly refuse the offer, and then recommended that she just go out to the balcony every morning and drink a cup of herbal tea. The guy exhaled tiredly, because treating people was quite a difficult task. At that moment, Meng Xin entered the office and immediately noticed that her assistant was all red, so she asked what happened to her. The girl asked the main character to accompany her to a banquet tonight and gave him her card so that the guy could dress normally. Su Chen caught the card and noticed that Xin was so cheerful even though it was early in the morning. The main character, having received the money, immediately came to Dr. Li to buy the necessary medicine for his grandfather. Outside the gate, the guy was immediately greeted by a quarrel, in which the healer was called a charlatan and thrown to the floor. Su Chen did not expect to see this, so he was surprised and looked respectfully at the participants in the quarrel. The man was dissatisfied with the doctor's work because it was he who promised the death of Meng Hao, which ultimately did not happen. He also accused Mr. Li of fraud because he had been treating the man's father for half a month and there was still no improvement. The dissatisfied client raised the doctor high above the ground and now promised to transfer his father to the central hospital. The healer's granddaughter was also present during this quarrel and was very worried about her grandfather, so she attacked the man to protect him. The main character could no longer stand by, so he asked the stranger to let Dr. Li go. The guy believed that a man could not behave like that because every doctor is trying his best to save the lives of his patients. The doctor's offender turned around and looked at the main character with irritation in his eyes. The old man immediately recognized the miracle doctor who saved the life of the hopeless Meng Hao. So he immediately turned his client's attention to the guy. If anyone in the world can save his father, a man, then this man was definitely the main character. The client refused to believe it because Su Chen looked too young to have such abilities. In the end, the man decided to believe the young man and took him to his sick father in the hospital. He gave our hero only 1 day, otherwise he promised to teach all the swindlers a lesson for such a shameless deception. Dr. Li began to worry because Mr. Wang's father had an extremely serious illness that could not be cured in 1 day, and asked for more time. The main character agreed that this is difficult for some, but also stated that today the client and his father were lucky. He promised that he could handle it in just a minute, and immediately began the acupuncture process. Just 1 precise needle in the forehead was enough to bring my father to his senses. The patient suddenly got out of bed and started coughing up blood, which made his son very scared and thought that Su Chen had done something to his father. Now the man believed that trusting the guy was a complete mistake and called people for help. Mr. Wang's bodyguards heard him and immediately ran into the ward with the stroller. The angry man promised to do everything tomorrow to ensure that Dr. Li's hospital is immediately closed. Su Chen was not worried at all and gave Mr. Wang one last chance to save his father and come to the guy within 3 days and beg for help. The client didn't even think about this possibility because now he didn't believe in the power of healers at all. The man put his father in the car, and he himself thought about how much Dr. Li and the main character infuriated him. Senior Mr. Wang coughed even more, which incredibly frightened his already nervous son. Suddenly, the father felt some relief and immediately told his son about it. The old man felt a slight surge of strength, so he thought that Dr. Li had managed to cure him, but the man did not know how to respond to this. The father was very excited about his recovery, so he wanted to thank his savior, whoever this person was. Mr. Wang was confused because he could not believe that the young man could really save his father. Meanwhile, our hero had already returned to the main company office with all the necessary materials, although he still did not find some ingredient. He thought about the fact that the ginseng root that Dr. Li gave him as a gift with a 10% discount was quite good. At that moment, a convertible in which Mengxin and her friends were driving up to the guy. The girl looked at her assistant and reminded him that she had asked the guy to buy himself more decent clothes for the banquet. The main character pretended that he simply forgot about the suit, but in fact, he spent all the money on medicine. There was no time left, so the girl exhaled irritably and asked Su Chen to get into the car. Sinner's friend immediately guessed that this was the same guy whom the girl had recently married. The friend also could not believe that the always busy Mengxin could have a lover so suddenly. The girl was incredibly annoyed by so many questions about her personal life. The guy also believed that the daughter of the Meng family could not marry the first hillbilly she came across. Mengxin calmly admitted that the main character was her husband and introduced him in front of her family. To avoid the awkward conversation, the girl decided to take a nap, which greatly offended her friends. Su Chen stopped them because his wife had clearly expressed her desire to take some rest during the trip. The girl's friend was very angry that our hero allowed himself to interrupt him. The guy again explained that his lover wanted to rest, which is why he asked his friend to be silent for a while. The major could not contradict Su Chen, so he turned away irritably and advised the young man to watch his words. As it turned out, he also knew acupuncture and just received a needle that would make incontinence an eternal companion in the life of the main character and would not leave any traces behind. The guy did not wait any longer and decided to take revenge on Su Chen right now by throwing an invisible needle in his direction. When the danger was already approaching the protagonist's face, only then did he notice it. The guy managed to react quickly and pretended to want to stretch and yawn, thus fending off the attack. He immediately recognized that it was an ice needle, and in the meantime, the projectile itself flew towards the attacker. Suddenly, the girl who was driving the car screamed, which woke up the now dissatisfied Mengxin. When she woke up, she looked at the cause of the noise and was surprised at what was happening in the front seat of the car. It turned out that the ice needle acts quite quickly, so the major immediately and shamefully emptied himself in his pants. Mengxin asked everyone to get out of the car while Mr. Zhang dealt with the problem that had arisen so suddenly. She promised to wait until the guy found himself a change of clothes. Major was shaking incredibly from such shame and anger at our hero, who was to blame for this. Su Chen heard Mr. Chen say his name, so he asked what was wrong. Then the disgraced guy could not stand it and rushed at our hero with a promise to kill him right now. Su Chen did not wait for the angry Mr. Chen to reach him, and simply slammed the car doors, hitting the major directly in the stomach. The main character again pretended as if nothing was happening and simply called the guy too noisy, and Xin could not understand what was happening. She guessed that Su Chen was involved in this strange incident, so she decided to quietly ask the young man himself about it. The guy did not reveal all his cards, smiled, and replied that he knew nothing about it at all. Mengxin did not easily lag behind her assistant, because she clearly saw that Mr. Chen wanted to attack our hero. The guy said that if he hits, it means he loves, and called the disgraced major his secret admirer. The girl asked the main character to be careful with this person, because it was thanks to Zhang Dong that their company was able to stay afloat after Mr. Meng's illness. Su Chen accepted his boss's request, but the problem was that he had already violated it. Meanwhile, Mr. Zhang's man drove up to the car, so he quickly ran out of the convertible. Finally, he said that now his company sees no point in cooperating with the Xin Company and canceled the meeting. Mengxin grabbed her head in irritation, because now they had lost not only the banquet, but also important cooperation. The main character reassured the girl and promised to find a way out of this situation. But in the meantime, he offered to collect all the debts. The boss didn't like that someone told the guy about the debts and asked him not to get involved in this matter. Su Chen didn't think so at all, so he turned around and said that he still needed to meet with someone. He asked Xin Er not to worry about him and promised to return all debts to the company. The girl could no longer stop her assistant, so she simply asked him not to get into any trouble. After some time, our hero and secretary Lu were sitting in the office of the Tianqiai Trading Company. Director Ma Tao agreed to think about money only if the beautiful Liu spent a week with him. Otherwise, the nasty man was not going to pay off his debts, which outraged the girl. Su Chen called this complete nonsense and promised the debtor big problems if he did not return the entire amount. Ma Tao was very annoyed that some boy allowed himself to threaten him not even on his territory. All the director's people immediately decided to attack our hero in order to teach him and the secretary a lesson. The young man immediately reacted to the danger that loomed not only over him, but also over the defenseless girl. The main character jumped out of his chair and suddenly kicked the first attacker right in the face. The other bodyguards, who were frightened by this turn of events, began to quickly run and knock down all their comrades on the way. Suddenly, Mr. Wang ran into the office, who was just looking for Su Chen, who helped his father. Ma Tao was annoyed that his employee intervened in the showdown, and meanwhile the man himself saw the mess and asked what was happening here. The director immediately became confused in front of his boss and promised to immediately call security to deal with the guy. He asked Mr. Wang to calm down and go to the conference room, but the man completely ignored him. Mr. Wang turned to the main character with a wide smile and asked if he could help him with anything, emphasizing that Ma Tao does not decide anything here because the company is run by the Wang family. Su Chen decided to directly say that this company owed his wife 10 million and now refused to return it, so he took some measures. Mr. Wang immediately attacked his subordinate for daring to set his men against the respected Dr. Su. The man realized what he had done, so now he tried to justify it by saying that he simply did not know about the guy's acquaintance with his boss. The enraged Mr. Wang hit his employee again and ordered him to immediately give all the money to our hero. Ma Tao immediately obeyed the boss and knelt down in front of Su Chen to apologize for the misunderstanding. He apologized for his misbehavior in front of Dr. Su and handed over a check with the debt and extra money as an apology. The main character did not take them, but asked the man to give them to Secretary Liu. The young man guessed that Mr. Wang was looking for him for the sake of his father, so he asked the man to take a piece of paper and a pen to write out a prescription. The man hit Ma Tao again and ordered him to quickly bring a pen and paper. When Su Chen received the necessary tools, he began writing the recipe and quickly completed the task. The guy threw a piece of paper to the joyful Mr. Wang, asking him to follow this treatment plan and give his father medicine 3 times a day. Our hero did not forget about Ma Tao, who was already scared after being punished by his boss. In the end, the guy decided to leave the director's fate to Mr. Wang himself, and he promised to teach his employee a lesson. The man did not spend too much time looking for a solution to this problem, so he simply decided to fire Ma Tao. Ma Tao could not stand such humiliation and promised to expel his boss from the market, and now no company would cooperate with him. He begged for another chance, but Mr. Wang didn't want to hear it and kicked him out of his company. The man also informed that a banquet would be held today in honor of his father's anniversary. He took out the invitations that his father personally asked him to give to his savior from his jacket pocket and asked the main character to attend this event. The young man was delighted at this opportunity because Xin Er had spoken specifically about this banquet and gladly accepted the invitations. The main character called the secretary because he wanted to return to the boss as quickly as possible so that she would no longer worry about them. Mr. Wang recognized Secretary Liu, who worked for the Meng family company, and now thought about these connections. He also noticed that the guy acted as if he had known Meng Hao for 100 years. So he suspected that our hero had a close relationship with the Meng family. Meanwhile, Meng Xin Er's mother already knew about the incident with their partner, so she asked her daughter about it. Ms. Meng was very angry because Mr. Zhang was an important partner for their company. The woman didn't care what exactly happened there because she only wanted her daughter to make sure she got to the banquet. Finally, she ordered her daughter to call Mr. Zhang and make an appointment, and also asked her to wear something decent to please her partner. Meng Sinner could no longer tolerate all the complaints from her mother, so she screamed and reminded her that she had asked her not to interfere in the company's affairs. Then the mother screamed, and demanded that the girl learn to solve her problems on her own and find a way to get to today's banquet. Sina began to get nervous from her mother's words and no longer knew what to say as excuses and arguments. At that moment, the doors to the room opened, letting in unexpected guests. It was the main character, who had just overheard this whole conversation about the banquet, and Secretary Liu with invitations in her hands. Mrs. Meng was shocked that the young man managed to pull off such an operation and gain the respect of Mr. Wang. She couldn't believe their authenticity and asked where Su Chen was able to get them. And the secretary said that Director Wang personally presented the invitations to the guy. Mother and Meng Xin were very surprised when they heard that such a respectful person knew our hero. Madame Meng could not understand at all how the hillbilly could know Mr. Wang. She didn't believe in the guy's capabilities at all, so she thought that he simply bribed the owner of the company, but the secretary saw the whole truth and tried to prove it. Liu Hanyun asked to believe her words and provided a check for 10 million that the company owed the Meng family. Then the main character reminded Madame Meng about the bow that they had agreed on, and Xin again did not understand at all what she was talking about. The woman did not want to admit defeat, so now she doubted the authenticity of the check and thought that the debtors could simply deceive them. Meanwhile, Ming Xin hugged her secretary with joy and suggested getting ready for the banquet. Madame Meng still didn't like it, so she stopped her happy daughter by putting her hand in front of her. The woman said that she had already called Mr. Zhang, who would be there very soon, so she could not let her daughter just leave. Sinner couldn't stand her mother's behavior and became furious that she couldn't stop prying into the girl's affairs and getting her to meet Mr. Zhang. She suggested that her mother wait for this guy herself if she liked him so much. All this time, the main character stood aside and silently watched the family quarrel with a smile on his face. In the end, Meng Xin did not listen to her mother and invited Su Chen and Liu Hanyun to go with her to the banquet. Finally, the guy called Madame Meng auntie again and said that he expected her to bow next time. The woman could not believe that her daughter was still on the side of the hillbilly and not her own mother. She looked after the couple and explained this only by the fact that the young man had bewitched Meng Xin. The mother wanted to prevent this union, so she asked her to wait for her, but Meng Xin was no longer going to listen to her. Then the events moved to the Wang family hotel, where most of the distinguished guests have already arrived. Everyone was dressed in the best clothes from their wardrobe, and pleasant music played in the background. Su Chen was dressed in a formal suit, and Meng Xin wore the best dress she could find. There were already rumors among the guests that Mr. Wang was going to announce a new partnership with another company. Mr. Zhang's friends asked the guy where Xin was and why she didn't come with him. The major said that he was already tired of this woman, and besides, he thought that her face was not so attractive, and he didn't even want to talk about manners. Our entire group was standing nearby, so Secretary Liu was able to hear the guy's words without any problems. The girl thought that such words towards her boss were too much, but her mother had a different opinion, because she was sure that business values people who know how to adapt and bend in time. Mrs. Meng decided to try to smooth out the situation and called Mr. Zhang with a smile, inviting him to come visit them someday. The guy's friends immediately attacked Meng Xin and started joking about her coming here uninvited to apologize to him. Zhang Dong, with a confident smirk on his face, stated that he was willing to accept the girl's apology out of respect for her mother and her efforts. Mrs. Meng immediately turned to her daughter and ordered her to apologize to Mr. Zhang. Sinner had absolutely no intention of listening to her mother, so she turned around and walked away in complete disregard. Zhang Dong and all his friends were shocked by such insolence on the part of the girl. Our hero finally decided to make fun of the guy and reassured him that he didn't have to worry about his incontinence because it was normal even at his age. Still, he recommended that Mr. Zhang not delay and solve his kidney problems. All of the guy's comrades were shocked by the news that their respected Zhang Dong allowed himself to pee in his pants, and now they thought that Meng Xin had abandoned him precisely because of this problem. The guy stood again and trembled from humiliation in front of all his friends and anger at Su Chen that he could not even say anything in defense of his dignity. Meanwhile, Secretary Liu had already approached the hotel staff and showed the invitation to the banquet. Zhang Dong immediately noticed this and could not understand where Meng Xin got the invitations from. The guard looked at the card with respect because he had never seen such invitations before. He bowed deeply to Liu Hanyun and asked him to wait a little while he ran to his elder for confirmation. Zhang Dong and his entire company laughed incredibly because they thought that Xin had decided to forge the invitations. He immediately walked up to the girl and began to mock her because of the awkward situation. but Miss Meng controlled herself perfectly. The mother also approached her daughter and reminded her of her words that the main character cannot be trusted. When the woman again tried to interfere, the girl still could not stand it and yelled at her again, because she was not going to follow her mother's lead. Sinner then turned to Zhang Dong and confessed that in the past she really respected him and wanted his cooperation, but now she only asked to pay for cleaning the car. With a smile, the girl made an indecent gesture and said that she had already paid for everything. So she asked Mr. Zhang to spend this money on going to the doctor and finally leave her alone. The mother and secretary began to get nervous because they understood what the consequences would be after such a daring step on the part of Xin Er. This move truly brought Zhang Dong to the boiling point that he couldn't even say a word out of anger. Now he swung without a doubt to finally finish off the too brave girl. Suddenly, the hand of the shameless offender Meng Xin Er was intercepted by someone. Obviously, this was the main character who could not allow such an attitude towards his legal wife. The guy said that Zhang Dong's kidney failure could be cured, but the same could not be said about his uncontrollable desire to attack people. Meng Sinner did not expect such courage on the part of our hero, so she looked at him with admiration in her eyes. Meanwhile, Zhang Dong was not going to endure any more humiliation, so he quickly pushed Su Chen away from him. He didn't want to let Meng Xin Er go just because they were now among people, so he invited the main character to fight right here. At this moment, the senior guard came out into the street, outraged that someone had allowed himself to offend the guests of the Wang family. Zhang Dong immediately thought without a doubt that they were talking about him. Suddenly, the guy felt someone put a strong hand on his shoulder. Two guards sharply broke down the major, who began shouting that he too was Mr. Wang's honored guest. At that moment, a senior man came out of the hotel and immediately apologized to the respected protagonist and his company. He walked over to Meng Xin Er and handed her the invitation that the junior employee had brought him. The girl began to guess that the guy had some kind of special relationship with Mr. Wang, which is why the young man was able to receive a special invitation. The senior employee once again apologized to the distinguished guests and invited them to finally join in the celebration. Zhang Dong was shocked that such a respectful attitude was not towards him at all, but towards his former partner. Mrs. Meng still didn't believe it and asked Secretary Liu if the invitations were real, and she happily confirmed it. The girl recalled that she told about the fact that Mr. Wang personally presented the invitation to Su Chen. Mrs. Meng was not happy with this turn of events and was now wondering how our hero could get the love of the old man. Meanwhile, the elder approached the delinquent Zhang Dong and stated that he and his family members were now blacklisted by the Wang family. The man shouted and ordered the young man to never appear here again. The security guards led the guy away from the hotel while he was desperately trying to prove that he was right and threatened a senior employee. The man was surprised by this because such invitations as Su Chen had were issued only 3 times in history and were equal to the status of the head of the family, and could not understand where an ordinary young man could get them from. Our company was finally able to get into the banquet hall, where the guests were already enjoying the best drinks and dishes. The waiter greeted the distinguished guests and escorted them to their empty seats. The guy who was already sitting at the table recognized the Meng family and said that he never thought that Xin Er would be sitting in the front row. The girl was delighted when she saw a familiar face next to her and turned to a guy named Jiao Lio. As it turned out, it was the head of the company, Jiao, who was not happy that old man Ming managed to survive, which is why his family will remain in business and will continue to be an eyesore for the guy. He was confident that Wang Company would sign a contract with him, and Meng Xin Er was angry because of his self-confidence. In the end, the girl decided to ignore it and asked Secretary Liu to bring a gift for Mr. Wang. She smiled at her opponent and reminded him that, in fact, the agreement had not yet been signed. In turn, Jiao Lio believed that you did not need to have a special mind to predict the outcome of this evening. Suddenly, their tense conversation was interrupted by shouts that Mr. Wang had already appeared in the hall. The Jiao Company representative immediately ran up to the head of the family and provided the keys to the villa as a gift. All the guests immediately drew attention to such an expensive gift, because they had heard a lot about the construction of this expensive house, for which there was not even a buyer due to the high price. Jiao Lio clarified that it was a small gift as a show of respect for the Wang family. Then Meng Xin Er decided to get up from the table and introduce herself on behalf of the Meng Company. It turned out that the girl was also no slouch and decided to give Mr. Wang an expensive bracelet, which was one of Biao Run's works. The guests were now even more shocked because they had previously believed that this creator had passed away 10 years ago, and now his works were selling for hundreds of millions. At the same time, The main character did not believe that such a trinket was worth hundreds of millions. He couldn't believe that a drunkard like his teacher could create such valuable work while thinking only about drinking. Jiao Lio guessed that such jewelry was quite difficult to obtain, but she confidently denied such guesses. Meanwhile, Mr. Wang thanked everyone who came to the celebration and announced that he had something very important to announce. Meng Xin-er and Jiao Lio already understood that he was about to announce a new partner for his company, so they glanced at each other. The old man did not rush to pronounce his decision, and before that decided to separately thank one more person. He said that this man saved him and gave him the opportunity to stand now in front of all the guests. The opponents understood that this was not about them, and they had no idea who could have saved Mr. Wang's life. The girl looked respectfully at the man who still had not said the name of his savior. She immediately noticed that Mr. Wang was looking exactly in the direction of Su Chen and could not believe that it was really her husband. At that moment, the main character felt a strong aura behind him, which came from one of the waiters. The young man did not wait for his name and gratitude to be announced, but rushed in that direction and apologized for his disrespectful gesture, because he felt that the special object had fallen into the hands of the wrong person. Mr. Wang didn't understand the reason for Su Chen's behavior and thought that he didn't want public gratitude. He guessed that the person who was able to cure him was definitely an order of magnitude stronger than the best doctors in the city, who could only shrug their shoulders and could not fight the spiritual power deep inside the patient's body. The old man thought for a second that he had no right to raise a toast to such a respected man, but then he realized that he could not insult his savior like that. In the end, he decided to drink to Mrs. Meng, who was delighted to receive such respect from Mr. Wang. Meanwhile, our hero came closer to the cursed object and felt that someone had deliberately bewitched him. He guessed that someone wanted to deliberately kill Mr. Wang, so he began to concentrate energy in his hands. The guy decided to help the old man because he was already nearby anyway and it wasn't difficult. He was very pleased to do another good deed. So Su Chen decided to follow fresh tracks to find the villain, who used high-level destructive spells. Meanwhile, Meng Xin-er was happily talking with Mr. Wang, and Jiao Lio could not understand what kind of connections there were between these two families. The guy began to get nervous because he suspected that such a development of events could become an obstacle to cooperation with the van company. He already had verbal agreements with Mr. Wang's son, so he believed that this chance should go to Zhao's company. Also, Mr. Wang decided to immediately announce that the most important news of the evening was also related to Mrs. Meng. He hinted that their company planned to join the beauty industry, so it was looking for a new partner. Finally, the old man announced in front of all the guests that Meng Company would become their new partner, which made Jiao Lio simply dumbfounded. Meng Xin-er was incredibly happy about this news for her business and was now simply beaming with happiness. Secretary Liu and Mother were also happy when they heard Mr. Wang's unexpected decision. Meanwhile, the old man tried to reassure Jiao Lio that the refusal of a business partnership did not mean that their company was lacking something. In fact, Mr. Wang understood that Meng's company was inferior to its opponents in many ways, but he was also confident that it was better to choose a reliable partner than just a profitable one. Jiao Lio thought that they wanted to make fun of him in this way, but he did not want to just give up because he still had a couple of trump cards up his sleeve. Suddenly, the guy stood up from his seat, causing Mr. Wang to be surprised, while Meng Xin-er respectfully watched her competitor's reaction. Jiao Lio smiled widely and stated that he had another gift for today's birthday boy. Mr. Wang did not expect this and emphasized that the young man did not need to bother himself so much, and the girl could not understand at what point her opponent became such a good-natured person. Jiao Lio clapped his hands, and at the same moment a waiter approached him, holding in his hands the same damned object that the main character felt. He tore the fabric off the gift and began to say that this thing was valued at 300 million, and stated that he had ordered it especially for Mr. Wang. Under the cloth was a golden toad, and the guy wished the birthday boy happiness and long life. He stated that he asked the master to infuse some energy into the jewelry so that it would go personally to Mr. Wang. The man was surprised by such a gift, so he was very embarrassed that the guy decided to take such care of him. In fact, Jiao Lio specifically found a person who was able to curse the golden toad, which is why Mr. Wang must now obey the orders of the spellcaster. The old man touched his gift, and the young man could no longer contain his joy because of such a reliable plan. Mr. Wang was surprised and decided to take a closer look at such a valuable gift from Jiao Lio. The guy carefully watched the man's reaction and thought that his plan had worked after all. The young man was now confident of his success, so he boldly pushed Meng Xian'er away in order to get closer to his victim and now manipulate Mr. Wang. He was confident that now the old man would undoubtedly cooperate with Zhao's company. Mr. Wang was discouraged by Jiao Lio's behavior and thought that he had hearing problems at such a young age. The young man could not understand at all what went wrong and why the man did not react to his orders at all. He sharply grabbed the old man by the shoulder and began to ask whether Mr. Wang had changed his mind about the partnership. The old man did not like such disrespect from Jiao Lio at all, so he roughly pushed away the shameless guy's hand. The security had already reacted to the danger that loomed over the head of the family and were already running to help Mr. Wang. Two strong men quickly broke Jiao Lio and took him outside to get some fresh air. The guy got very nervous and tried to escape from the strong hands, but it was useless. He thought that he had been tricked because it was obvious that the curse had not worked on Mr. Wang. All the guests were confused by Jiao Lio's act and thought that he was possessed by a demon. Meanwhile, Mrs. Meng was happy that she had the best daughter in the world, and Secretary Liu was celebrating that their efforts were not in vain. In the end, Mr. Wang laughed lightheartedly at the show and asked his guests to continue enjoying the banquet. Meng Xian'er also could not understand what happened to her competitor and also thought that he was possessed by an evil spirit. She also noticed that Su Chen had finally returned and couldn't understand why he was acting so mysteriously. Ultimately, Xian'er decided to directly ask our hero about this, and he replied that he was simply in the restroom. The girl said that now their company will become a partner of the Wang family, emphasizing that before, Mr. Wang's son and Mr. Zhao had verbal agreements. The main character smiled and said that such events were only for the better. Meng Xian'er suspected that the guy was involved in this decision of Mr. Wang, but he denied these guesses from the girl. Madame Meng also thought that her daughter was talking complete nonsense because she believed that it was the merit of her grandfather, not an ordinary hillbilly. Despite her mother's words, Xian'er still didn't think that Mr. Meng was unlikely to be able to achieve this, but her speech was interrupted by the sound from the protagonist's empty belly. Madame Meng believed that her daughter underestimated her grandfather because he had connections with powerful members of the Wang family from a young age. In fact, Meng Xian'er didn't even realize that they had any other relatives because Mr. Meng never mentioned it. The girl still could not understand why her assistant and husband left the hall precisely during Mr. Wang's toast. Madame Meng decided to end the discussion on this topic and asked Su Chen to bring a glass of wine for her. The guy was not going to change his attitude until she apologized for her behavior, which made her angry. He decided not to listen to his mother-in-law and go find himself something to snack on. On the way, our hero met a waiter who bowed and announced that Mr. Wang wanted to see Su Chen. Meanwhile, someone had already brought a glass of red wine to Madame Meng and asked her to calm down. As it turned out, it was Zhang Dong, who was still able to get to the banquet and wanted to apologize for the past misunderstanding. Meng Xian'er was unhappy with the unexpected appearance of her former partner, so she asked how he managed to get to the event. Zhang Dong, who actually just bribed the doorman, asked the girl not to be angry because he was supposedly trying to take care of her and prevent the problems that Xian'er could cause due to her impulsiveness. Xian'er guessed that the guy just heard about cooperation with the Wang company, which is why he immediately came running to apologize so as not to lose such benefits. The guy pretended that all this was not true and emphasized that such words deeply offended him. Then the mother decided to intervene in the tense conversation, reminding her that her daughter had been planning to cooperate with the Zhang family for years. In the end, the girl could not stand it and agreed to have a glass with Zhang Dong. The guy watched too closely as Xian'er drank her drink and emphasized that she was not at all like all the other girls. Having finished the wine, she radically changed her mind and expressed hope for understanding during further cooperation with Zhang Dong. Xian'er immediately felt that the drink had a strange taste, and meanwhile her face visibly turned red. In fact, Zhang Dong had mixed something into the girl's glass and was now drooling on his defenseless victim. Meanwhile, Meng Xian'er began to feel that her body was enveloped in heat and her mind was becoming cloudy. She abruptly stood up from the table and stated that she needed to leave for a while. Zhang Dong immediately chased after the girl and suggested that his doctor examine her, but she ran away from the guy as fast as she could. Even through the clouding of her consciousness, she tried to escape from the hands of the bastard because she suspected that something was wrong here. At this point, the mother finally noticed that there was something wrong with her daughter and asked why she was blushing so much. The woman did not suspect anything and thought that Xian'er simply had a cold, so she recommended that she still contact Dr. Zhang Dong. In the end, Ming Xin simply asked not to touch her and went to the restroom as quickly as possible. The guy with a sinister grin on his face promised that he would take good care of Madame Meng's daughter. The woman tried to reassure herself that her sister spoke well of Zhang Dong, so she hoped that she would not do anything bad to her daughter. Meanwhile, the guy and Ming Xin, who had almost no control over her actions, were in the hotel parking lot. He put the girl in the back seat of his car and was glad that he could have her completely at his disposal. In fact, Zhang Dong could not even think that his partner would be able to butter up the Wang family like that. And if he had known this earlier, he would have immediately started courting Xin. Now the guy didn't want to waste time and planned to start doing bad things. Suddenly, something crashed right into the back of Zhang Dong's head and interrupted all his lustful plans for his victim. Obviously, this was the main character who felt that his wife and boss were in danger. He believed that a person who goes against the weak humiliates himself in the eyes of a worthy opponent. Su Chen didn't wait any longer and slammed Zhang Dong into the pillar with one easy movement. From such a strong blow, the guy lost consciousness and was now sitting helplessly on the floor. Our hero was relieved that he was able to come in time and save Meng Xin from such a bad outcome. The young man didn't even want to imagine how he would justify himself to his grandfather for not keeping an eye on his granddaughter. At this moment, Xin decided to roll over and unconsciously hugged her savior, pressing her body against his. The guy smiled because it looked like a real scene from a movie when the hero saves his beauty. He carried the girl out of the parking lot and onto the street and approached one of the hotel employees to ask for help. Su Chen asked the guy to call a taxi and tell Mr. Wang that he and Xin had left the banquet. The employee immediately noticed the VIP invitation, so he bowed deeply and promised to quickly fulfill our hero's request. After a short period of time, Su Chen and Xin had already reached the Meng family's house, where their grandfather was already waiting for them. Mr. Meng could not understand what happened to his granddaughter and thought that she had accidentally overdone alcohol. Then, the old man noticed that the girl's face was too red, so now he thought that she was sick. The main character took out a needle to immediately begin treating Xin and stated that something had been slipped into her at the banquet, which made the grandfather very surprised. Su Chen inserted a needle into the girl's neck, causing her to quietly gasp in slight pain. The guy turned to Mr. Meng and assured that all toxins would be removed from his granddaughter's body by puncture with silver needles. Grandfather was shaking with incredible anger, so now he definitely wanted to know who dared to do this to his beloved girl. Su Chen said without hesitation that it was the scumbag Zhang Dong who borrowed a very strong drug from someone else. Meanwhile, Li Hai came to the Jiao family's office where Jiao Lio was already waiting for him, who wanted to find out whether the man had managed to do everything. The subordinate reported that he gave the drug to Zhang Dong and helped him bribe the doorman to get into the banquet hall. Jiao Lio was delighted with such luck and now promised to forget about Li Hai's past actions. The man stammered and thanked his boss, but suddenly the phone rang. The guy immediately picked up the phone, and Li Hai was already happy because he thought that his operation was successful. At the other end, Jiao Lio's name was shouted very loudly, which made him seriously scared. He couldn't understand why Zhang Dong's father decided to call him at such a time, so he just stared at the phone. The guy immediately began to suspect that the loser Li Hai had done something wrong again and revealed that it was he who was behind it. In the end, Jiao Lio gathered his strength and responded to Mr. Zhang, and the man felt that his boss was worried. Zhang Lingshou was simply cowardly with anger, and now wondered what the guy allowed himself to do to his son, who was now lying on the bed like a vegetable and making incoherent sounds. In the end, the angry father screamingly explained to the young man what had happened to Zhang Dong, and blamed it on Jiao Lio. The guy couldn't believe that this happened to his friend, and Li Hua immediately realized that something had happened to Zhang Dong. Zhang Lingshou added that his son became like this after the banquet, and the doctor said that the young man would remain like this for the rest of his life. The man asked around the guests and found out that only Li Hai, who was sitting with Jiao Lio, and Meng Xin were seen next to Zhang Dong. He angrily asked if the guy wanted to explain something to him, and he immediately stated that it was as if the father did not know what was happening in his son's life. Jiao Lio immediately blamed it on his comrade and began to lie to Zhang Lingxiu that his son was pursuing Meng Xin, or using not the most honest methods. He made a false assumption that it was the revenge of the Meng family or their fiancé who was our hero. The man clicked his tongue displeasedly and said that women were nothing but problems. In the end, the father became furious at this information and vowed to wipe out the Meng family from the face of the earth. Jiao Lio pretended that he was also upset by this news about Zhang Dong and offered his help to the guy's offenders, promising to resolve this situation in just a week. Zhang Lingshou still agreed to such a proposal as a sign of respect for their long partnership. He hung up and, looking at his now helpless son, promised to take revenge for this incident. In fact, Zhang Dong was still conscious, but was now unable to move due to some technique from Su Chen. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Mr. Wang was sitting with his acquaintance over a glass of wine and also discussing the main character. Zhang Jishui, who was the director of the quality control department, took his glass and asked if this guy was really such an amazing person. Mr. Wang asked to believe him because he never lied. But at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Su Chen himself, who abruptly flew into the office and asked if the old man had the thing he was looking for yesterday. The man was delighted with Dr. Su's visit and asked the young man to sit at the table with them. As it turned out, yesterday they had a long conversation about medicines, during which Mr. Wang mentioned a special ginseng. Our hero immediately felt a very strong magical aura that emanated from this root, and the old man said that, according to rumors, this ginseng is about 1,000 years old. Su Chen closed the box and happily declared that this was exactly what he needed. Mr. Wang laughed heartily and replied that it was a great honor for him to help the esteemed Dr. Su. He also added that he would like the young man to also examine his friend Jiang Zhishui, who has been experiencing more frequent headaches lately. Su Chen immediately analyzed that it was not a matter of physiology at all, but of the spiritual part, the evil spirit. Mr. Wang was shocked by such terrible news about his close comrade. Jiang Zhishui immediately became more serious and looked carefully at the main character who gave him such an unusual diagnosis. Su Chen immediately began asking if the man had moved to a new place or spent the night in other places, but he denied everything. Suddenly, the patient jumped up from his seat and shouted, ordering the guy to stop asking all these questions. Mr. Wang was frightened and could not understand what was happening to his comrade. It turned out that the man did not believe in the abilities of our hero. So he believed that the old man had simply warmed up to a charlatan and asked not to talk to him about this nonsense anymore. Su Chen asked Zhang Zhishui to stop, because out of respect for Mr. Wang and love for helping people, he decided to do everything to make the man feel better. The main character took an amulet from his pocket and handed it to the patient, but he thought that this was another way to get a penny for an ordinary trinket. The guy grabbed Jiang Zhishui's hand and put the amulet into it, saying that it was absolutely free. Meanwhile, the man noticed that the main character had considerable strength and dexterity because he didn't even have time to blink an eye when the amulet was in his palm. Mr. Wang asked his comrade to accept this gift from Su Chen to show that the man still values their friendship. These words were able to influence Jiang Zhishui because he still respected the old man. The man snatched the amulet from the guy's hands and said that he would do this only as a sign of their good friendship. Still, Jiang Zhishui was disappointed with his comrade's stupid behavior and decided to say it one last time. He left the room and slammed the doors in irritation, while our hero and Mr. Wang watched in bewilderment. The old man apologized and explained that his friend had slightly different views and did not have a sweet character at all. Su Chen replied that everything was fine and asked Mr. Wang to look after his comrade for the next few days. The guy warned that negative energy would come out of Jiang Zhishui, and the old man promised to find more medicinal herbs and do whatever Dr. Su asked. Now events continue in the Meng family home, where Meng Xin-er's mother has returned. The woman was worried about her daughter because she heard that she and Su Chen left the banquet much earlier. Her father was waiting for her in the living room, who was definitely not in the best mood after the incident with his granddaughter. Mr. Wen turned to his daughter because he had been waiting for her appearance for a long time. The woman explained that she had had a little too much alcohol last night, and because Su Chen had taken the car, she had to spend the night with a friend. She immediately inquired about Xin-er's condition, but grandfather did not answer, but only hit his cane hard and called his daughter a scoundrel. Mr. Meng suddenly jumped up from the sofa and gave the woman a strong slap in the face, which she definitely did not expect. She burst into tears, held her now red cheek, and fearfully asked her father why he hit her. The old man became even more angry that his daughter had the conscience to ask such things, and explained that she had almost ruined her own child's reputation. He told what bad things Zhang Dong wanted to do to their defenseless Meng Xin-er, which is why the woman was simply in a stupor because she didn't even know about this situation. The mother was very scared and immediately rushed to look for her daughter to see if everything was okay with her. Xin-er, meanwhile, was completely fine and sat calmly on the bed with her things already packed into a suitcase. The frightened mother quickly ran into the room and immediately began asking if everything was okay with her daughter. She ran to her beloved girl and fell on her knees in front of her, and Xin-er indifferently replied that everything was fine with her. Mr. Meng expected his daughter to behave so irresponsibly and was glad that the main character was next to his granddaughter. The woman tried to justify herself to her father because she trusted her friend and really had no idea that Zhang Dong was such a bad person. The mother apologized to her daughter and was now ready to do anything just so that she would forgive her. Then Meng Xin-er announced that she would live outside the house for a while until everything was settled. Ms. Meng thought that her daughter had decided to move, but she explained that she would simply live in the company office. She tried to prove that it wasn't on purpose, so she took out her phone to text her friend and break things off with her. The girl couldn't stand her mother's stupid behavior, so she turned around and pushed her away. Madame Meng couldn't stay on her feet, so she dropped the phone from her hands and fell helplessly to the floor. Meng Xin-er asked her guilty mother to finally stop interfering in her affairs and leave behind her adult daughter. Madame Meng continued to lie on the floor and tried with all her strength to stop the offended Xin-er. Old man walked closer to his daughter, who was now crying because of what she had done to her beloved girl. But the father had no sympathy at all. The girl had already gone out into the street where a taxi was waiting for her, which would take her to her new place of residence. She was met by the main character, who asked if his wife was going on some kind of trip. Xin-er explained that she seemed to have too much work to do, so she decided to live in the office itself for a while. Su-chen did not stand by, so he took the suitcase from the girl to help. She was surprised by such a gesture on the part of our hero, but he did not understand why Xin-er decided to leave such a beautiful house and now spend the night in the office. The guy emphasized that his boss was too obsessed with work and looked carefully into her eyes. Meng Xin-er felt warm in her soul that someone cared about her after all and smiled. She decided to come closer to the main character and take his hand. The girl said that she would have an important meeting today and asked the main character to go with her, but he was not happy with this decision because he had just returned home. After a while, they arrived at the Meng family's company office together. At the entrance, they were immediately met by a frightened secretary, Liu, who shouted that the company was in serious trouble. She said that the project they had been working on for the last 6 months, porcelain bottle, unexpectedly did not pass inspection, and now the company faces fines and lawsuits. Xin-er could not understand where this problem came from, because the project was already in the final stage and had all the necessary certificates and documents. In the end, the girl asked the secretary to take her to the place where the porcelain bottle was being checked. The assistant took our heroes to the right place, where one of the employees was already waiting for them. It was an angry Zhao Fei-yang who was panicking over the complete failure of the project and asking if the boss was going to do anything about it. He continued to shout that the company could not afford to lose several million, but Meng Xin-er continued to keep a cool mind and remain silent. As a result, she simply calmly replied that she understood the whole situation and promised to sort out all the problems that had arisen. Su-chen immediately asked the secretary who this person was, and she said that Zhao Fei-yang was second in importance after the Meng family members. In fact, the man was up to something, because from the very beginning the project was under the control of his people and planned to bring Xin-er to collapse. Because this was accompanied by the Juo family, Meng Xin-er, accompanied by her assistants, entered the laboratory where they were immediately stopped by an unfamiliar woman. It was a representative of the trading industry named Jiang Bing, who announced that the owner of the company should cooperate with the investigation. Xin-er smiled and introduced herself to the inspector, explaining that the president of this company was standing in front of her and asked what was the reason for the current situation. Jiang Bing explained that they had recently done a check and found that the seal on one of the documents was fake, so now production had to stop immediately. The girl was shocked by such information about her own project and could not understand how such an oversight could happen. She remembered that she worked on the porcelain bottle with Han Yun, but at some point she had to leave due to her grandfather's illness. Xin-er began to guess something, so she asked the secretary who was filling in for her during her absence, and the assistant replied that it was Zhao Fei-yang. Liu Han-yun wanted to do this project herself, but the man insisted and decided to handle the documents and certificates himself. Now the secretary also began to guess that Director Zhao could be to blame for this. The girls turned around together and looked at the man who stood ominously behind them and observed the situation. Now, they were sure that he was planning to do something bad with the Meng family's company project. Meanwhile, Xin-er again tried to prove to the inspector that there was some kind of misunderstanding, because Meng's company always follows all the rules, and suggested that they discuss this situation in a civilized manner. In fact, Zhang Bing only went along with Zhao Feiyang because he could provide her with a specialist for her seriously ill father. The sneaky director saw doubt in the woman's eyes, so he realized that he needed to throw some wood on this fire. He decided to further manipulate Zhang Bing's position and decided to write a message to her on her phone. The woman was surprised when her phone vibrated about an incoming notification. Zhao Feiyang reminded that Zhang Bing's life was in her hands, and if she wanted him alive, she had better follow the man's instructions. She was outraged that Director Zhao allowed himself to behave so disrespectfully towards her, but unfortunately, she had no other choice. The woman turned to her employees and asked them to take Meng Xin-er and her entourage away from here. The big guys approached our group and immediately warned that if they resisted, the situation would only get worse. At this moment, the main character finally decided to intervene in this situation and stated that they all did not object to anything. He took a step forward and calmly asked the guys not to put so much pressure on their company. Meng Xin-er felt that things were getting worse and wanted to find a solution to the project problem as quickly as possible. In the end, our heroes, accompanied by security, left the laboratory to no avail. Suddenly, Secretary Liu said that she was the one to blame for the failure of the project. Xin-er reassured her employee that they hadn't done anything wrong anyway, so they had nothing to fear. Zhao Feiyang stood at the corner and watched this from the shadows, wondering how the boss could handle this situation. At that moment, someone decided to call the main character's phone, so he immediately took it out of his pocket and Zhang Bing noticed this. The woman immediately ran up to Su Chen and took the phone away to answer the call herself. The guy could only laugh at the behavior of the inspector, and she had already turned to the person on the other end of the call. As it turned out, it was Jiang Zhishui, who still wanted to contact our hero, but in the end was unable to do so. Zhang Bing apologized and said that the young man could not answer the phone because he was on his way to the Food Industry Administration office for investigation. In the end, the woman gave the phone back into the hands of the main character and asked that everything happen without tricks. Meanwhile, the man was shocked that Su Chen was under suspicion from the food industry department. After some time, our hero sat in the interrogation room opposite Zhang Bing and under the lens of a camera that recorded everything. The young man explained that he was an ordinary employee who had joined the company a couple of days ago, so this situation did not concern him in any way. Zhang Bing had already investigated that the young man had never worked anywhere before and so abruptly received the position of assistant to the president of the company. So she thought that the guy was the child of rich parents. Su Chen did not explain anything and simply assumed that he was just a lucky guy. The woman didn't like our hero's positive attitude, so she ordered him to stop telling his stupid jokes. She also emphasized that the guy's boss had already admitted everything, but the young man only laughed and was not going to prove anything else. Now, the woman realized that the main character will not simply split, so other methods need to be applied to him. She wanted to teach the young man a lesson so that he would remember exactly where his place was, but Su Chen still did not agree with all the accusations against him, because he considered himself a law-abiding citizen. Jiang Bing finally understood that the guy was not a coward, so she gave a sign to her employees. She wanted to know if the main character was really such a sinless boy. Suddenly, Jiang Zhishui burst into the interrogation room, who was dissatisfied with what his employee allowed herself to do. The woman was very scared when she realized that her boss had caught her doing something that wasn't exactly right. Officer Zhang then explained that he came here because he heard that his savior had fallen into the hands of Jiang Bing. She became even more nervous when she learned that the suspect was the savior of her boss. So now she could not understand the identity of the main character at all. Meanwhile, Su Chen asked the man what happened that made him change his opinion about the guy so dramatically and now called him a savior. Jian Jieshu admitted that our hero was right, and after their meeting the day was extremely unlucky, because the officer got into an accident, although he himself was not injured, but now the car could not be saved. After this unpleasant incident, the talisman that Su Chen gave him simply began to burn by itself in the man's hands. It didn't end there, because immediately after the accident, Zhang Zhishui was almost killed by an ordinary flower pot. A couple of minutes ago, the talisman simply burned out completely, after which the officer completely changed his opinion about our hero. The man thought about the fact that the guy warned him about 3 failures from which the talisman would save him. Only now, all attempts were exhausted. He bowed to Dr. Su and apologized for his past words and open impudence. Zhang Bing was completely puzzled when she witnessed her boss bowing to the young man. The main character asked to drop all formalities because he just fulfilled the master's request. Zhang Zhishui also emphasized that on the way here, He checked all the documents of the Meng company and did not notice any illegality there. So he now suspected that the officer was acting in collusion with Zhao Feiyang. Jiang Bing realized that this could be the end of her career, so she desperately tried to explain everything to her boss. The man did not listen to her excuses, so he ordered the staff to simply take her away from the interrogation room. She tried with all her might to prove something to Officer Jiang, but he was no longer going to listen to her. Our hero sincerely thanked the man for such help and asked if he wanted to correct the situation with negative energy in his body. Of course, Jiang Zhishui did not want to refuse such help, but first he wanted to deal with the situation at his work. Now the events moved back to the Meng family company building. All the employees were worried that their boss had suddenly been arrested. Zhao Feiyang was already actively gloating to his colleague and emphasized that now it doesn't look like she has everything under control. Sinner's father had just flown in from abroad when he heard the news about Mr. Meng and was now shocked by the situation in the company. Director Zhao continued to pour gasoline on him and stressed that the company's reputation could suffer greatly due to such an incident, which would be a huge blow to its overall condition. Another employee slammed his hand on the table and expressed his opinion that Meng Xin-er had crossed the line and now had to explain herself. Other directors also began to express doubt that the girl would be able to cope with this situation, and believed that leadership positions were not a woman's job. Meng Song could not stand such disrespectful words towards his daughter, so he ordered his subordinates to calm down and not make hasty conclusions. The staff said that they trusted President Meng, but the results of her activities were obvious. Zhao Feiyang asked Mr. Meng to just accept reality because they still wouldn't be able to trust Xin-er after what happened. He also added that Meng Shang's protection of the girl would spoil the company's reputation, and recommended that his daughter be protected from all consequences. At that moment, someone burst into the conference room without knocking to announce very important news. The secretary announced that things were bad because now the director of personal management had arrived at the company. The members of the board of directors were shocked by this news and were seriously afraid because things began to go too far. Zhao Feiyang asked everyone to remain calm and suggested that they just go and find out everything in person. In fact, he was happy that he would be able to personally witness Meng Xin-er's collapse, not yet realizing that the director of the department was on her side. The man did not wait any longer and went to meet Jiang Zhishui, who was sitting in his car. He turned to Director Jiang with a smile and introduced himself as the director of the company, asking what brought the manager here. Jiang Zhishui already knew about Zhao Feiyang, which made the company director surprised that the man was already familiar with his name. The man gloated that the director of the department, Meng Xin-er, was not with him and was glad to see the results of his labors. In his dreams of becoming president, he did not notice how the officer had already handcuffed his hands. Zhao Feiyang couldn't understand what was happening and tried to ask Director Jiang why he did this. Jiang Zhishui reported that the man is accused of conspiring against the management of this company. Jiang Zhishui did not expect such a turn of events and now thought that Meng Xin-er had simply betrayed him. Meanwhile, the secretary offered her hand to the girl so that she could carefully get out of the car. The man noticed his main enemy and now interrogated how she managed to pull it all off and destroy all his plans. She did not get angry and calmly replied that Zhao Feiyang had fully gotten what he deserved. Then the girl approached Director Jiang to thank him for his help and asked him to tell him when he would be free, because Xin-er wanted to thank the man with dinner, but he replied that she needed to thank Su Chen. Meng Xin-er looked at her former colleague one last time and emphasized that he was not at all worthy of the position of the president of the company. The department staff took Zhao Feiyang by the shoulders and ordered him to behave calmly. The girl herself was surprised that it was the main character who helped solve this unpleasant situation, because before that, she thought that they were just lucky. Jiang Zhishui explained that it was all thanks to the guy's talisman that saved his life. The young man did not mind the men thanking him with a simple dinner, and also felt that the officer's aura was still not in order, so he planned to find the reason for this phenomenon. Our hero said goodbye to Meng Xin-er because he still had some unfinished business. The girl also decided to take care of important matters, because the family company still had many problems left. Meanwhile, Su Chen was already at Jiang Zhishui's house and asked if he had recently done renovations, and the man confirmed our hero's guesses. Having analyzed the officer's place of residence, the guy immediately understood the cause of his troubles. This house had a deathly dark aura, as if someone had died there. Jiang Zhishui was shocked by this conclusion from Dr. Su about his apartment. He thought that the guy was simply mistaken, because the officer received this house from the state, so it was unlikely that something like that could happen here. The main character suggested that perhaps in principle, no one died in the house. He walked along the walls and felt the spot where the old wallpaper that director Jiang was talking about had come off. The guy apologized and said that he would have to ruin the man's new renovation. Jiang Zhishui did not like this prospect for his apartment at all, so he asked again whether this was exactly a necessary measure. Su Chen asked to trust him. And now, without hesitating for a second, he concentrated his strength in his hand and broke through the wall with it. The discovery behind the walls of the house shocked Director Jiang, and now he simply could not believe his eyes. As it turned out, real human bones were hidden behind the walls of the house all this time. Our hero explained that they had a strong aura, which is why the man suffered from negative consequences for a long time. Suddenly, all the light bulbs in the house went out of order, causing Jiang Zhishui to be seriously scared. A strong pain impulse flashed through his head, and his whole body was covered in cold sweat in a second. Director Jiang began screaming in incredible pain and asked the main character to help him. Su Chen guessed that someone from the repair team was killed, and the killer threw the body and murder weapon into the wall. The main character turned to the spirit and asked him not to worry, because the killer would definitely be found and punished. He immediately used several of his talismans to seal away the evil spirit. The guy quickly sorted out this problem and promised that now no one would touch Jiang Zhishui. The frightened man immediately noticed that the headache suddenly went away and relief came. He bowed low to our hero and thanked him for his help. But he did not ask for thanks and emphasized that the officer held on only thanks to the strength of his own spirit. The young man also said that he would take the machete he found with him to find a new place for the poor victim. Otherwise, her spirit would return. Officer Jiang himself promised that he would definitely find the worker's killer. The next morning, the main character sat in the garden and meditated alone to improve his skills. The guy believed that early morning was the ideal time to cultivate energy, because 2 hours of practice at this time was equivalent to 3 days at other times. Su Chen felt his skill level growing more and more every day. At that moment, an uninvited guest came into the garden and interrupted the young man's training with his cough. As it turned out, our hero's new father-in-law decided to visit him. The man said that he had already heard a lot about what happened yesterday at the company and about the help of Director Jiang. Our hero believed that these were just trifles. But Mr. Meng had a completely different opinion because the young man saved his father and daughter. The father-in-law had already heard that Su Chen was interested in antiques and medicinal herbs, and the guy confirmed his guesses. It turned out that he was also interested in such things, so he wanted to show the main character something. Mr. Meng took Su Chen in his car to the desired area, which was decorated in ethnic style. He explained that the main character was in the city recently, so he didn't know a lot of things. So the man asked the guy to tell him about the things he liked. Mr. Meng also said that a few days ago he acquired a painting that turned out to be an ancient original by a famous artist, so he wanted to show it to the main character. The seller in the antique shop said that the painting that Mr. Meng plans to buy is in considerable demand. Meng Song himself told our hero that its author was a famous court artist, so he had been looking for the original for the last few years, and the seller meanwhile offered 2 million for this copy. In fact, the shop owner was a deceiver because he found a craftsman who made for him this first-class copy that would deceive even a professional antique connoisseur. Mr. Meng was very happy about such a valuable find and was already reaching into his jacket pocket to take out the money. At this moment, Su Chen already felt something was wrong in the painting, so he stopped his father-in-law. The seller did not like the fact that the young man got into a deal that was profitable for him and interrupted it. The main character explained to the man that there was definitely something wrong with the picture. Mr. Meng was shocked because before this, he was sure that what was in front of him was the original. Moreover, Meng Xiang submitted the painting for expert evaluation, where its originality was confirmed. The seller began to get nervous that his lies could be discovered, and reminded that they had already discussed the painting for quite some time, promising to sell it to someone else. The man immediately stopped the activist because he really wanted to get his hands on this particular work of art. Now he was angry with our hero, who really wanted to help his father-in-law and asked not to get involved in the matter if you don't think anything about it. The guy decided not to insist further because he believed that it was useless to argue with fools. Now someone called the seller's phone and interrupted the deal with Mr. Meng again. He apologized to the man and walked away to answer the call. But Meng Xiang was not at all worried and was ready to wait for the sake of his desired purchase. The shop owner decided not to waste the opportunity and increase the price, because Mr. Meng allowed himself to doubt the originality of the painting. Meanwhile, the father-in-law talked to Su Chen and asked him not to do this again, because this would only anger the seller. The guy nodded his head with a tight smile and listened to Mr. Meng. At the same time, another visitor entered the antique shop, to whom our hero immediately drew attention. He was a fairly ordinary guy who immediately began looking around strangely. He saw Su Chen with his father-in-law and immediately realized that his boss was talking about these people. As it turned out, the young man came to play the role of an interested buyer and, as a result, manipulate Mr. Meng. The seller liked the reaction of our heroes, so now he was confident that he could deceive the simpletons. Meanwhile, the guy had already approached the owner and said that he wanted to get this painting, which made Meng Xiang very surprised. The seller apologized to his fake buyer and explained that he was leaving this painting specifically for Mr. Meng. The guy knew that the man still had not paid for his purchase, so in order to raise its price, he named the price at 5 million. The owner pretended to think about such a deal, and then the young man offered 6 million for the painting. The main character suggested that Mr. Meng give in anyway, because he was sure that this was not the original. The man clenched his teeth tightly, because this was truly his dream, and began to think about what to do in this heart. In the end, he did not listen to the main character and offered 10 million for the painting with one check. The charlatan salesman did not expect to hear such a large sum, so he was very happy about the potential earnings, calling Meng Xian a generous connoisseur of art. Now the man looked at his competitor with fury in his eyes, making him afraid of such an ominous aura. The guy said that he did not have such a large sum with him, so he promised to quickly run home. Meng Xian quickly wrote out a check for 10 million and gave it to the seller of his desired painting. The deceiver was delighted at such a large catch and pretended that he accepted the check only as a sign of his long friendship with Mr. Meng. Now the owner of the antique was absolutely sure that his buyer was an absolute idiot. When our heroes left the store, Meng Xiang couldn't be happier with his purchase. Su Chen emphasized that for such a huge price, even a simple cardboard would be more beautiful than any work of art. The man did not like this comment from the main character, because he was still angry because it was because of the young man that he spent 8 million more than he had planned before. People around noticed the painting in Mr. Meng's hands and began to pester him to see this expensive purchase. Meng Xiang liked this attention, so he decided to show off his acquisition. And Su Chen reminded that smart people do not flaunt their wealth. Such a statement by the protagonist extremely angered his father-in-law, so he completely lost his mind. He opened his antique painting to share this beautiful art with everyone around him. The man told everyone around that he had found the original of the legendary Yuji Ding. People began to admire the fact that the gentleman was able to buy a real treasure and kindly envied him. Suddenly, someone from the crowd asked what kind of treasure it was that everyone couldn't take their eyes off. As it turned out, it was an unfamiliar old man accompanied by some girl. The girl introduced her grandfather, Mr. Sun, who is the leading appraiser of antiques in this province, so it is extremely difficult to find such a professional. People around him called the old man arrogant, but Mr. Meng would not mind hearing the opinion of such a respected expert. Meng Song was helped by one guy from the crowd to unfold the painting in front of Mr. Sun. The old man said that the painting had a very heavy technique because Yu Ji Ding was a great master and mastered many different techniques. He placed his hand in front of him to study the work better and named the amount between 50 and 60. Meng Sang was incredibly happy because he thought that the old man was offering him 50 or 60 million for this painting. He had already raised his nose high and boasted to everyone of his luck, planning to invite the whole crowd to dinner. Mr. Sun gave the man a very serious look and explained that he did not mean millions, but 50-60 yuan. Meng Sang did not expect such a failure at all, so he was shocked when he heard the price for his much-coveted painting. People around began to say that it could not be that the work was a fake and were not going to believe the old man at all, but Mr. Meng had already begun to doubt. The man still tried to calm himself down and asked Mr. Sun to just take a closer look at the painting. He grabbed the old man's hand and asked if the expert could simply have made a mistake. The girl stood between them and asked Mr. Ming not to touch her grandfather. Mr. Sun tried to calm his granddaughter, Juju, but she defended her grandfather and assured him that he was an experienced expert. The old man asked Meng Xiang not to worry and just try to tear the painting to check its authenticity. He explained that not only were the colors of the painting wrong, but also the paper it was painted on, because the original canvases were thin, but this one was much stronger and more modern. Mr. Meng was already in despair, so he decided to listen to the old man and tear up the painting in order to finally resolve the issue of its authenticity. The expert asked to pay attention to the white threads that were added to the cellulose to make the paper more flexible, and this technique began to be used only 100 years ago, that is, after the death of the artist. Ming Song held his torn dream in his hands and still could not believe that he had been so brazenly deceived. Now he realized that Su Chen knew about the fake from the very beginning and tried to warn him several times. The man understood that it was already too late to think about it and noticed that just at that moment the owner of the antique shop came out onto the street. Mr. Meng did not wait a second and rushed to the charlatan to deal with him right then and there. He quickly grabbed the deceiver by the collar and asked where the seller was trying to run away so quickly. Meng Song threw him to the ground with all his might and demanded a refund for the fake he had sold earlier. The store owner pretended that he did not understand what was being said, because he and the man had been partners for a long time and simply could not tolerate such treatment of each other. Then the seller decided to make concessions and allowed me to choose something to replace the painting. In fact, for Mr. Meng, the problem was not a matter of money at all, and he definitely did not intend to take fake junk. Our hero did not refuse this opportunity and decided to take a look at the store's assortment. He entered the store and began walking along the stands, choosing the right piece of antiques for himself. In the end, the young man settled on an inconspicuous dark ball. The owner said that this thing had been lying with him for 6 months, no one needed, so in this way Su Chen could save him from unnecessary troubles. Suddenly, the stone ball began to crack and bright rays of energy burst out from within. The main character now held a green jewel in his hands and believed that there was no longer any need to waste time on contracts. All the people in the crowd were shocked that the guy was able to find the Pearl of the Night, which is worth at least 50 million, under an inconspicuous stone. Jiao Chu and Mr. San also couldn't believe that our hero just took the pearl out of its shell. The store owner tried to snatch the jewelry from the young man's hands, but he of course did not let him do it. The seller was very unhappy because he now believed that the pearl belonged to him and was not an ordinary trinket. Mr. Meng reminded the scoundrel that he himself said that they could take anything in exchange for the painting. Now the store owner was not at all willing to keep his promises because a huge sum was at stake. In the end, he began to threaten that Mr. Li from Jinshan would deal with our hero after just one call. But Su Chen had not heard about this organization and this did not tell him anything. Then, Mr. Ming said that this is a well-known organization, rumored to be connected with Jiao Lio, and the problem was that the man did not take security with him today. He turned to Su Chen and asked him to simply give the pearl to the owner so as not to run into trouble. Mr. Sun intervened in the conversation and suggested doing things a little differently. The old man asked the main character if he could sell him the pearl if Mr. San himself guaranteed his safety. The guy refused because he fell in love with this precious ball and also wanted to see what these empty threats would lead to. Then the seller did not wait any longer and, grabbing his phone, promised that his customers would not even be able to step beyond the threshold of the store. The main character didn't mind at all, because he wanted to see what this organization was all about. At this time, Mr. Sun sighed heavily and thought about how impulsive young people can be. After some time, our heroes were already driving in the car and Mr. Meng had already guessed that the guy could not be stopped. But he assured that everything would be fine. At the same moment, someone cut them off so sharply that the driver was barely able to react to the threat and press the brake. Due to the inertia, Meng Xiang simply flew into the seat in front because he did not expect such a sudden jerk. Meanwhile, the driver backed up to get away from the inappropriate driver. As it turned out, there was Li Hai inside, who was unhappy that someone was allowing trouble to be created on his territory. He walked up to the car where the main character was sitting and hit the hood with all his strength with the bat, which made the driver very scared, but Su Chen remained absolutely calm. The man asked how many of them were in the car, but the frightened driver did not understand a single word. Then our hero, without the slightest fear, decided to be the first to talk to the bandits, saying that the seller had already talked about them. He decided to get out of the car, and Li Hai immediately realized that he had already met a guy at Mr. Wang's banquet, and this meeting was not pleasant. The other bullies laughed at our hero being so brave and stressed that younger brothers should be more respectful. Two strong guys swung their clubs and decided to deal with Su Cheng as quickly as possible. Li Hai didn't want any unnecessary problems on his head, so he asked his comrades to stop. In fact, the main character didn't need any help because he sent his opponents flying with just one good blow. The bandit leader was very frightened of Su Chen and begged in tears not to touch him. The main character was glad of this opportunity because last time he just didn't deal with Li Hai, but fate brought them together again. Then the bandit fell to his knees and began to promise that this would not happen again. And then Su Chen asked to be taken to the head of the organization. The guy thought that today was a great day to deal with the abandoned cases, and also wanted to find out whether they were involved in Mr. Meng's poisoning. Meanwhile, Li Hai was still sitting on the ground and was afraid of his boss and the main character, who also managed to become an authority for him. In the end, the bandit finally brought Su Chen to his headquarters, but he still could not calm himself down and continued to be very cowardly. He asked the main character not to rush so much because the man was truly too scared. Li Hai explained that there lived a bandit named Wang Shan, who had killed half the city when he was still a teenager. In fact, this place was run by this young man, although formally it was under the control of Li Hai, so if he found out that the man had brought outsiders here, he would simply be beaten. Li Hai asked our hero to pretend that he found this headquarters on his own. Su Chen turned to the bandit and said with a smile that he could become the new boss of this place. Wang Shan sat surrounded by beautiful girls and asked what happened on the antique street, where Li Hai went and still hasn't returned. In the end, the irritated young man stood up and decided to go to that place on his own. He failed to do this because it was at that moment that our hero burst into the room, kicked the doors, and knocked out the guard. The guy with a smug grin on his face asked if the same Wang Shan was standing in front of him. The girls were frightened by someone else's interference and fled, but the bandit could not understand who this daring young man was. Su Chen did not explain anything and directly inquired about the guy's involvement in the poisoning of Mr. Meng Hao. Wang Shan clearly felt the incredibly strong aura of our hero and could not understand how he managed to penetrate the entire headquarters. He was surprised that he still had not heard of such a strong young man, but he decided not to think about it anymore and just smash Su Chen to pieces. As a result, the bandit did not answer Su Chen and had already accelerated to deal him a devastating blow. The main character was not afraid at all because he was confident in his abilities, so he simply smiled cheekily. Wang Shan was very surprised when he saw that he simply hit the floor and broke it into pieces. The bandit looked around and could not understand where his opponent was, although our hero was simply standing behind him. Su Chen, concentrating energy in his hands, looked at his opponent and called him a walking corpse. Suddenly, blood flowed from Wang Shan's mouth and he clutched his stomach tightly in severe pain, not understanding what was happening to him. He couldn't believe that our hero was actually stronger for him, and he just fell lifelessly to the floor. Li Hai watched this from the side and was now panicking that this place and it would now definitely come to an end. He understood that he would definitely get hit by the boss, so he decided to just run away from here to save his life. But that was not the case because the main character saw these movements and grabbed Li Hao by the clothes. The man tried to lie that he suddenly remembered that he forgot to feed his chickens and asked if Su Chen wanted something. Su Chen simply thought that it would be bad if all the good in the form of all the thugs in the headquarters just disappeared. He invited Li Hai to be his deputy and look after all these people, threateningly grabbing the bandit's hand. Now the man began to panic even more because he now thought that our hero was going to kill him. Su Chen asked if the man would be happy about such a wonderful opportunity, and he agreed in tears. The guy casually pushed the bandit and ordered him not to run anywhere, assuring him that he was now under a curse. Immediately, a symbol appeared on Li Hai's hand from the protagonist's touch. Suddenly, a strong pain pierced the man's hand, and then a furnace began in place of the symbol. Our hero hoped that Li Hai and his people would not do anything stupid because their leader would be responsible for everything. The man was depressed that he was now literally Su Chen's slave, but there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Meanwhile, the antiques seller sat quietly and sipped tea, laughing with satisfaction. He already thought that our hero had already been taught a lesson by Li Hai, and the guy was on his knees apologizing for his behavior. Suddenly, he noticed that a breathless guest had returned to him and asked how everything went with Su Cheng. The shop owner smiled and hoped that the young man's entire face was already swollen from the blows. Li Hai thought about the fact that in fact all his people were lying on the floor, unfortunately, not Su Chen. Suddenly, the bandit began to shout angrily at his subordinate, blaming him for all the troubles. He was sure that if the antiques seller had not been guilty, he would definitely not have fallen into the hands of our hero. The man took out his phone and now wondered how strong the guy's curse was. At the same moment, the symbol on his hand made itself felt, and Li Hai again screamed loudly in incredible pain. He looked at the salesman with an ominous smile and asked if the subordinate wanted to compensate his boss for the damage. A moment later, the bandit was already carrying various types of antiques in his hands, cheerfully whistling a song, and the owner of the shop asked the boss to leave him at least some goods. Night has already fallen and now events are transferred to the office of Zhao's company, where the excited Jiao Lio was now located. He desperately tried to call his subordinate Li Hai, But the bandit, for obvious reasons, did not answer his calls. Then the guy still couldn't stand it and threw his phone onto the table with all his might, promising to turn Li Hai into a corpse. At this moment, Jiao Lio's phone received an incoming call from another person, so he quickly picked up the phone. It was Mr. Zhang, who was unhappy that the guy promised him so much, but in the end, the man still did not see any results. Jiao Lio explained that something happened because he had no idea that Mengxian might have acquaintances in management. Mr. Zhang did not want to listen to anything from the guy because he really wanted to take revenge on the Meng family for his crippled son. Jiao Lio asked the man not to worry about this because although Fei Yang had screwed up, but now his father hated the Meng family even more and also wanted revenge. He emphasized that this employee was quite closely associated with Meng's company because it was his people who were working on the company's main project, namely a skincare product. If Mr. Zhao joins their plan, all the people will leave the project and sabotage its progress, which is why Meng's company will simply not survive. Meanwhile, the main character was sitting in the garden and calmly sipping his morning tea, enjoying the nature around him. His tea-drinking process was interrupted by Mr. Meng, who was very joyful and was carrying some kind of scroll in his hands. Su Chen immediately noticed his father-in-law's positive mood and asked if something good had happened to him. The man said that the owner of the antique shop decided to return his money and even gave him a painting as compensation, and our hero immediately realized that Li Hai had done an excellent job. He immediately handed the scroll to the young man because, just for fun, he wanted to check whether it was the original. Even though Meng Xiang did not pay a penny for it, the main character began to unfold the painting to examine it when Mengxian came into the courtyard. The father immediately noticed that his daughter was quite early today and was upset about something, and she asked if Mr. Yu was at home. Xian reported that Zhao Jinming moved to another company and took his people with him, which is why their main project is now in jeopardy. She explained that she urgently needed Mr. Yu to develop a new formula, and the main character offered to find him personally. Mengsong didn't have time to understand what happened when his daughter and Su Chen left, so he simply wished them good luck in their search. After a short period of time, they finally found Mr. Yu and sat at the table discussing this problem. The old man understood the difficult situation the girl was in, but it would take him at least a year to develop a new formula. Meng Xian was sure that by this time her company would definitely be impossible to save, so she asked if there was another option. Then our hero decided to ask himself what kind of formula it was, the development of which took a whole year. He picked up the previous development of this project and opened it to take a closer look at this cream. Mr. Yu explained that the problem is that it is not just a formula, and the ingredients and qualified employees are not so easy to obtain, but the main character was already actively writing his plan. The old man also hinted that he is not getting any younger, and his contract is already a little bit reaching its end. Meng Xian was upset that Mr. Yu was going to leave their company and couldn't imagine what they would do without his help. At the same moment, Su Chen put his version of the formula and brief instructions for it on the table and declared that this problem could be solved. Meng Xian wearily held her head and asked the young man to stop fooling around. She thought that in this way the main character was trying to defuse the situation, because she could not believe that he could take a formula off his head and describe it all so quickly. Su Chen leaned on the back of the chair and confidently stated that he could do this without any problems. Mr. Yu appreciated our hero's confidence and decided to take a look at his version of the formula. The old man was shocked when he carefully examined the ideas of the main character and could not believe in such genius. Meng Xian watched Mr. Yu and could not understand why he had such a strong reaction to the tomfoolery of the protagonist. The employee did not pay attention to the girl's question and asked if the guy could really write an even better formula than this one. Su Chen was confident in his abilities, so he quickly wrote the best formula for the cream without any problems. He defiantly raised a piece of paper with his work, and Mr. Yu, with trembling hands, reached out to take a closer look at it. The expert never thought that he would be able to see the ancient secret formula with his own eyes. He asked why Mrs. Ming had previously been silent about such talent, and asked for permission to begin developing the drug, and also offered to draw up a new contract right now. Mr. Yu did not wait for his boss's answer and happily ran to ask the secretary to prepare the necessary documents. Meng Xian decided to take a closer look at the formula in person and wondered if it was really that good. She asked Su Chen to explain his work because their previous recipe was not bad, and the quality of the product was high. Then the main character said that it was a recipe called the Secret of Sheng Shui, which surprised the girl. She had heard a legend that ancient healers made it especially for the queen and the emperor's concubines, but the recipe was considered long lost. Now, understood the reason why Mr. Yu was so excited when he saw the formula, because it was a priceless treasure. She asked the smug young man where he was able to get such an ancient recipe. The main character said that on the day he turned 18, his master promised to let the guy go down the mountain if he could restore the formula. And in the end, Su Chen was able to do it. Meng Sinner still couldn't believe that the young man simply took and restored a recipe that had been lost for centuries, because other companies were spending billions on it. Now she was sure that Su Chen's master was a good person, as her grandfather said about him. The girl thought that our hero should be thanked for agreeing to share this treasure with their company, because of which they will now always be in the black. She simply asked what Su Chen needed and agreed to fulfill any of his requests as a sign of gratitude. The main character was delighted at this opportunity and looked at her carefully, without looking away. Because of such a close gaze, the beauty immediately became embarrassed because she thought that the young man wanted something obscene. In fact, the guy just asked for a few million because he wanted to buy a couple of medicinal herbs. Sinner was even more embarrassed, but still handed the young man a card with 50 million as payment for the written recipe. The satisfied protagonist left the office with his funds and now planned to make medicine for Mr. Meng. The guy decided to look at his friend Dr. Li, who was just thinking about some kind of recipe. The old man still could not understand what was missing for the ideal medicine formula, because something was definitely missing. Our hero took a closer look at the problem and quickly answered that the healer was missing licorice root in his recipe. The old man agreed with this advice and remembered that this component helps neutralize the poison and improve the general condition of the body. He raised his eyes to look at the expert and was happy when he saw Dr. Su in front of him. The main character explained that he came here for the best herbs, which are at least 1,000 years old. Dr. Li said that if a guy could find something like this in the city, then it could be done in his shop. But he also emphasized that such goods were priceless. Our hero asked for a little time to think about what he could offer for priceless goods. He eventually revealed that he had a secret technique for processing materials and offered to exchange this knowledge for herbs. After some time, Dr. Li's assistants came out of the alchemy hall, who were unhappy that their mentor was letting just anyone in there. The healer immediately ordered his students to be silent and declared that they were not even worth the little finger of the protagonist. The guys did not believe that Su Chen was so good and thought that some scammer decided to deceive their mentor. Suddenly, they smelled a very strong aroma of ginseng concentrate coming from the alchemy hall. Although they had never smelled such a thing before, Dr. Li himself was surprised because even a 1,000-year-old root could not produce such a strong smell. The main character came out with a bowl of medicine, emphasizing that the equipment was so-so, and asked his colleagues to take a look at this medicine. All the doctors inhaled this smell into all their lungs and could not understand how the guy achieved such a result. The healer admitted that only the most skilled healer was capable of this, because the methods of ancient alchemists were used for production, and the effectiveness of such a medicine is amazing. Everyone around could not believe that our hero had just used such an ancient technique. Dr. Li immediately bowed his head in front of such skill and promised that Su Chen would now become an indispensable member of their shop. He also promised to find what the young man asked for, but before that he asked to wait a few minutes and went out to the backyard of the store. There was an old man sitting there who immediately felt that Dr. Li had found ginseng of incredible power. By the smell, the master immediately heard that the root was at least 8,000 years old. Dr. Li immediately emphasized that he would not have been able to find such a treasure and explained that the elixir was made from century-old ginseng in his shop. The old man thought that this was complete nonsense, so he thought that the student decided to play a trick on him in this way. He walked up to Dr. Li irritably and snatched the bowl of ginseng extract from his hands. The master also admitted that for the first time in the last 20 years, he smelled such a scent, and asked the student to tell the truth. Dr. Li assured that he could not afford to deceive his teacher, and repeated that the root was only 100 years old. The old man was very surprised that the student did not lie, but still could not believe the age of ginseng. In the end, Dr. Li revealed that the extract was the work of their new master, who was the main character. He also added that Su Chen was ready to exchange his technique for 1,000-year-old ginseng, which the old man was immediately happy about, and ordered to bring several roots. As a result, after some time, the assistants loaded the protagonist's car with boxes of various expensive herbs. The old man hoped that their cooperation with Su Chen would continue for a long time, and the guy, of course, agreed to this. He asked the young man to visit them more often, and the assistants noticed that the master had given away all his supplies. The old man heard that his disciples doubted Su Chen's abilities, so he immediately ordered them to shut up. The master was confident that thanks to the technique of the protagonist, they would flourish for at least another 1,000 years. After a while, Su Chen had already arrived at the hotel room and began preparing to prepare medicine for Mr. Ming. He believed that the trip had been quite successful, and by absorbing the spiritual energy from the pearl, the guy would be able to move to the next level. The guy was not disappointed that he checked so many options and now found the ideal place where he can pump up well. Meanwhile, the pill was already ready, and Su Chen was sure that this medicine would definitely help Grandfather Meng. Suddenly, the young man noticed that something strange was happening outside the window and immediately drew attention to it. He looked out the window and saw Mr. Sun and his granddaughter Juju surrounded by a group of armed bandits. The main character immediately remembered that he had met these people in an antique shop, and now he could not at all understand what was happening on the street in front of his windows. Su Chen noticed that Juju was skilled with a katana, so he concluded that they knew martial arts well. One of the bandits decided not to wait any longer and, apologizing, opened fire on Mr. Sun. The old man was not a simple man, so he quickly reacted to the threat and began to fight off all the bullets with the help of 2 katanas. In the end, he was unable to fully defend himself, which is why some of the bullets still reached his body. Mr. Sun could not withstand such injuries, so he fell to the ground exhausted while his granddaughter fought with another bandit. The girl noticed that her grandfather was injured and began to worry, which is why she was distracted from her opponent, who was already preparing to attack her. Juju did not have time to react and block the attack, so she received a strong blow right in the stomach. The bandit laughed at the fact that the girl would soon meet her grandfather in the next world anyway. The main character decided that since fate had brought them together again, he could not let them die. Meanwhile, the gang member took aim to finally shoot his victims and send them to another world. Su Chen deftly and quickly jumped up to the girl and asked her to borrow a katana for a while. Juju did not have time to react and understand who it was, and our hero had already rushed forward to stop the bandit. The criminal did not have time to react to this turn of events, so he simply watched as the machine gun in his hands was simply cut in half. Stuttering in shock, he asked who was such a clever guy who came to the aid of their victims and interfered with the gang's work. Su Chen, with a grin on his face, stated that he was not at all worried about the gang's affairs, and assured that today they would definitely not be able to carry out their plans. Now, all the bandits aimed their weapons at our hero in order to deal with him as quickly as possible and continue their business. It was enough for the young man to make one deft maneuver so that one of the criminals would already be neutralized. Next, the main character jumped from place to place and quickly dealt with any of his opponents with the help of a katana. In the end, the entire gang was defeated, and Juju was able to go to her injured grandfather to help. Su Chen could not understand who could send such people on a mission if they did not even have minimal combat skills. Mr. Sun was able to take a closer look at the guy and now realized that he had already met his savior before. Our hero turned around and recalled that they had recently met in an antique shop, hoping that grandfather and the girl had not forgotten him. The old man remembered that it was this young man who discovered the Pearl of the Night. He was very grateful to Su Chen and could not think that a guy at such a young age could reach the Grandmaster level. Su Chen couldn't understand what level of skill Mr. Sun was talking about because he only knew that he was currently at the Foundation Formation level. The old man was surprised that our hero did not know the complete classification of a warrior's development. He said that the bandits were quite strong, but in his best years Mr. Sun could have dealt with them. But now, unfortunately, he had certain problems with cultivation. The grandfather made a conclusion about the level of the main character precisely by the way he dealt with his opponents. And meanwhile, the guy was surprised that they had different classifications of levels. In principle, the young man didn't care what level he had by the old man's standards. But he didn't ask for anything in return for help. Our hero simply saw that people were in danger, and without any selfish motives, he decided to help them. He began to use his energy to heal Mr. Sun's wounds, which made the granddaughter afraid for her grandfather because he looked tense. Su Chen asked the girl not to worry and recommended that she just wait a little. Mr. Sun started coughing and his granddaughter asked him if he was okay. Suddenly, the old man jumped to his feet because for the first time in months, he no longer had trouble breathing. Now he felt complete harmony and had not felt so good for a long time. The main character asked if the old man had noticed that the more he cultivated, the more problems he had with breathing, and suggested that Mr. Sun's technique might be a fake. Mr. Sun was shocked by such a sudden assumption on the part of the young man. Now, the old man began to look in his pockets for a small blue book. Grandfather explained that he received this technique as a gift, so he asked our hero to look at this book. The young man began to look through the textbook and had no questions about the first half, but the second part was an ordinary invention. Then Su Chen turned to Juju and asked if she had a pen with her. The girl happened to have a pen with her, so now our hero could write his explanation of the technique. He showed his robot to Mr. Sun and asked him to now just follow these instructions to use the technique correctly. Grandfather respectfully read the explanations from the main character and was surprised by such knowledge. Now, the old man understood everything and immediately decided to try out the new knowledge that the talented young man gave him. He concentrated all the energy in his hand and, accelerating, hit the wall of the fence with all his might. On the other side, there was a cyclist who did not even suspect that a concrete wall would collapse on him right now. The guy was able to react at the last moment and drive away from an unsafe piece of concrete that was flying straight towards him. Mr. Sun felt embarrassed for not being able to calculate his new powers and apologized to his accidental victim. Grandfather and granddaughter admired the talent of the main character and now called him a master. The guy believed that there was nothing special about the fact that he was able to take and correct the technique so easily, because it was written when the guy was only 10 years old. Mr. Sun believed that today fate itself brought them together with our hero, so he wanted to get to know such a talent better and gave him his business card. The young man said that he was pleased to meet you and thought about the fact that the San family owns an advanced production of medicinal materials. Meanwhile, Juju said that Jiao Lio had just called to discuss their cooperation and asked her grandfather what time to schedule the meeting. Mr. Sun was outraged that the guy had the nerve to call him when the book he gave him almost killed the old man. The main character was interested in the fact that it was Jiao Lio who gave this textbook, and the old man explained that the guy had long wanted to go into cosmetology, and so he was desperately looking for new partners. Mr. Sun did not know what the potential partner was going to offer him, and he was not eager to meet him. Juju asked if Grandpa thought that Jiao Lio slipped him this wrong technique on purpose. Then the girl asked our hero to go with the old man and accompany him to a meeting with their partner, because she was worried about the safety of her grandfather, promising to pay any money for it. Su Chen explained that it wasn't even a matter of money, but that he had personal scores with Jiao Lio, and moreover, they are direct competitors. The guy thanked them for the fact that last time his grandfather and granddaughter took care of his father-in-law, and today he paid for this Borg. The main character said goodbye to his new acquaintances, but Juju did not want to lose such a good assistant. The young man asked them not to worry because Li Juo's skills were still not enough to harm anyone. Mr. Sun sighed heavily and emphasized that his granddaughter was too impulsive and confused Su Chen with an ordinary mercenary, because for a high-level master, money can be an insult. As for Li Juo, grandfather simply decided to take some precautions. Meanwhile, the main character began to think that it was too troublesome to live in the city because one carelessness could lead to danger. After helping the Meng family, the guy wanted to return to his original plan, but for now he didn't want to get into any trouble. In the evening, Su Chen was already in the office, where he learned that Meng Xin-er was just looking for contacts of the Sun family. The girl explained that they were going to develop in their province, so their new partner would forget about the hardships for the next few years. But the problem was that Xin-er had no mutual acquaintances with them. When the young man listened to the experiences of his wife, he immediately decided to hand her a business card, which he managed to get from Mr. San. The girl, with hope in her eyes, looked at the card that had all the contacts she needed and could not believe that it was the same San Qua Ti. She asked again if it was really the business card of the head of the San family, and the main character simply suggested that she call this number and find out for herself. Sinner happily grabbed her phone and began dialing the number of her potential profitable partner. The main character liked the smile on the girl's face, so he didn't mind interfering in the company's affairs again. In the end, the girl was able to arrange a meeting with Mr. Sun, and Su Chen was happy to follow her progress. Now events moved to the Tengfei estate, which was located somewhere in the mountains. Jiao Lio could not understand why Mr. Sun so abruptly refused the invitation and changed his mind. His employee thought that maybe it was because the partner was disappointed with other companies, but the guy didn't think it was that simple. Jiao Lio promised that if the negotiations were unsuccessful, the man could pack his bags and leave the company. The assistant could not say anything to his strict boss, so the poet simply agreed to his terms. Mr. Meng was very angry with the Meng family because they were the reason he was in this situation. At the same time, the main character and Meng Xin-er arrived at the Tengfei estate and immediately noticed their competitors. Jiao Lio also immediately sensed his enemies and began to mock that Meng Xin was so dedicated to her cause that she came here knowing that she would definitely not be able to gain the support of the Sun family. The girl was not afraid of ridicule from her competitor and asked what he forgot here. Jiao Lio stated that he came here to discuss cooperation with the Sun Company and asked whether the girl really believed that she would succeed at least. Meng Xin was shocked by such insolence on the part of her opponent and tried to express at least some arguments. The guy asked her not to say anything and asked what else their company could boast of, except for the project with the skincare product. Jiao Lio was confident in himself and did not think that this project could become an obstacle to cooperation with the Sun family. Meng Xin considered her competitor to be a real visionary, and he was happy that the girl would witness his incredible success. Their tense conversation was interrupted by the gates of the estate, which were finally opened for guests. Of course, potential partners were met by Mr. Sun and his granddaughter Juju. The first to immediately run to greet Jiao was Li Juo, who did not want to lose the opportunity to prove himself. Mr. Sun was surprised that the guy was present here, because he should have already received a refusal letter about cooperation. From shock after such news, Jiao Lio simply froze in place and did not even know how to respond to the old man's refusal. The grandfather was confused, so he asked his daughter what was going on here. Juju lied to the old man that she simply forgot to tell Mr. Zhao about their refusal. The gentleman apologized to the guy for such a misunderstanding, shaking his hand, and promised to call his driver to take the young man back. Jiao Lio, in a panic, began to ask what was wrong, because the Sun Company itself was looking for a reliable partner in the city. The old man could no longer tolerate such behavior on the part of the guy and hit him on the hand so that he would not touch him anymore. In the end, Mr. Sun decided to directly communicate that he had decided to cooperate with Ming's company. Jiao Lio was shocked that Xin was again crossing his path and ruining all possible plans. The old man left the depressed young man alone while he approached his future partners. Apologizing for the wait, Meng Xin was surprised when she heard Mr. Sun's decision because she had not yet guessed the agreement from the Sun family. Mr. Sun explained that he made this decision just a second ago, so no one knew. He assured that he had carefully studied all the detailed information about Meng's company and was satisfied with its work, and the old man was also indebted to Xin husband. Then the girl realized that again it was Su Chen and no one else who was behind her success. Meanwhile, our hero realized that the old fox invited Jiao Lio here to publicly humiliate him and take revenge. Suddenly, the guy hugged his wife by the shoulders and joyfully declared that they could not let Mr. Sun down during such an important collaboration. In the end, Mr. Sun and Miss Meng shook hands to seal their union. Jiao Lio stood to the side, clenching his fists in anger, and watched with envy as Meng Xin took away his next partner. Juju asked Mr. Zhao to walk with her so that she could ask the driver to give him a ride home. The guy took one last look at his rival and admitted that she had exceeded all his expectations. Now he was even more angry with her and promised that she would definitely pay for all her actions. Our hero noticed his enemy's indignation, so he decided to finish him off and show him a thumbs down. Then Jiao Lio remembered the main character, promising to finish him off for such insolence. The assistant could barely keep up with his boss, who quickly wanted to leave the estate. The man tried to calm his master and tried to beg for another chance to improve. Suddenly, Jiao Lio's guards grabbed his employee, which made him seriously scared. The guy had no sympathy for his employee and called him useless trash who was not capable of anything. He believed that such garbage should be thrown out as quickly as possible, and the assistant continued to beg for mercy. Meanwhile, Jiao Lio asked his other employee to contact the person who could pull the necessary strings that they had already prepared. Within a very short time, Secretary Liu had already learned that their employee Zhao Jin was dead. The main character heard this news and immediately asked what happened to the man they had recently seen alive. The girl said that in the past he was involved in the finances of the company, and not long ago he borrowed a large sum of money on behalf of the company and did not return it, so Liu Hanyun instructed her friends to find him. But now the girl received a call and was told that Zhao Jinming's body was found cemented in a wall at one of the construction sites. Su Chen immediately began to deeply analyze the situation and asked when exactly the employee died. Meng Xin intervened and asked our hero to stop pretending to be a detective because they had gathered here to discuss work issues, and in the meantime, she was looking through the online store page. Secretary Liu began to get nervous because Huo Dong was already an hour late, and she couldn't understand where he was all this time. At the same moment, a smug man in an expensive suit finally entered the office. Mungsinner was overjoyed when manager Huo finally joined their business meeting. The man leaned his elbows on the wall and joked that he had heard that someone was unhappy with his lateness. With a strange expression on his face, he suggested not holding today's meeting at all. Sinner and Secretary Liu looked at their colleague in surprise and could not understand what he meant by such a proposal. Mungsinner decided to make concessions, so she apologized to Huodong for their wrongness and asked him to sit at the table with them. The man, looking at his expensive watch, said that he was in a hurry because he had his next meeting in 10 minutes. The girl knew that the manager was a very busy person, so she decided to try to tell everything briefly. President Meng began to talk about the fact that they are currently working on several large projects worth more than $1 billion and are taking out a loan of $300 million for them. She asked the manager to review the documentation and also promised to close the loan as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Secretary Liu noticed that the man was reaching out and looking not at the documents but at her body. The girl really didn't like manager Huo's behavior, but she couldn't say anything in his direction. As it turned out, Huodong also worked for Jiao Lio, who asked him to block the flow to Meng Company. The man understood that these projects were indeed very large, so Mr. Zhao did not want Xin to be able to get a loan for it. As long as he was alive, Manager Huo was not going to allow Meng's company to receive a loan from at least one bank. The man threw all the documentation high and stated that he had already carefully checked everything on the way here. Secretary Liu and Meng Xin watched this action in surprise and could not understand what had happened to their employee. Huodan explained with a grin on his face that the company still had an outstanding loan of $300 million, which they still had not repaid, so they could not get a new one. In fact, Jin guessed that Zhao Jinming would do something nasty before leaving her place of work. Manager. Huo realized that the secretary and boss had already realized everything and said that he had contacted all the banks he could. With a grin on his face, he recommended that Meng companies not even hope for any sponsorship from banks. Xin'er tried with all her strength to ask Mr. Ho for help, promising to sort out the problem as soon as possible because all projects require at least minimal investments. Huodan, without removing the grin from his face, repeated that he could not in any way help the company president in a financial matter. But in the end, he agreed to help only if Meng Xin spent one night with him, which shocked the girl. Secretary Liu immediately came to her boss's defense and asked Manager Huo to watch what he said. The man did not stop talking about this topic and began to put pressure on Xin so that she would fulfill this request and quickly receive the required $300,000, and also offered to involve his friends in this, who could become sponsors. Finally, Su Chen decided to intervene in the conversation, who admitted that the manager had never had to get hit in the face before. Ho Dan did not fear the young man and suggested that our hero try to beat him. Sinner asked her husband not to give in to emotions so as not to end up in the police because of some idiot, but the main character was not going to use violence. Then Mr. Ho laughed because the guy couldn't even stand up for his beloved woman. Huodan had already gotten up to leave the meeting when the chandelier began to spin above his head. He reminded her that Jin always has his number and promised that his arms are always open to her. At the same moment, parts of the chandelier fell from the ceiling, which simply killed the vile manager. As a result, Ho-Dog was pinned to the floor by the chandelier, and blood began to flow from his nose and mouth from such a strong blow. Secretary Liu was very scared for the man and couldn't understand what had just happened before their eyes. The main character laughed that even the gods themselves could not bear to look at Mr. Huo's behavior. Su Chen recommended that the man should behave better in his next life. In fact, Ho Dan was still alive and now begged the guy to call an ambulance for him and not throw him here on the floor. The main character decided to manipulate the manager and said that the company needed to find a sponsor as quickly as possible, so they were in a hurry. The guy said that if a heavy object is left on a person's body for a long time, it can lead to paralysis, and also emphasized that Mr. Ho will not be able to call for help because the office has excellent sound insulation. Huo Dan, in fear, begged our hero not to leave him, and in the end, he still agreed to give the Meng company money only if they called an ambulance. Su Chen was delighted and said that he should have started with this, asking him to immediately sign a document to provide the company with a loan. In the end, Mr. Huo was taken away by an ambulance, and Meng Xin looked at the signed document in surprise. The girls were ashamed that they had received this necessary loan in such a not very honest way. They turned to our hero and looked at him displeasedly as the main culprit in this situation, and he tried to prove that the chandelier itself fell on Ho Dan. Suddenly, Su Chen received a notification on his phone, which he took completely seriously. The young man asked the girls to go further, but he himself went in the other direction because he had some business to do. Senior asked where the guy was going, and he replied that he was going to do good deeds. Meanwhile, the girl thought that the chandelier had fallen at the most opportune moment and could not believe that it was all an accident. As it turned out, the main character went to the forensic department, where Zhang Zhu Shui had already investigated that the body found in the wall was related to Zhao Jinming. The officer noticed that the method of killing the two bodies was quite similar. Su Chen believed that perhaps the killers could be different people, but they had exactly the same mastermind. The officer asked if the guy had at least some other evidence, but he had nothing, but already knew some guesses. If this is the person our hero was thinking about, then very soon there will be a considerable amount of evidence. Meanwhile, Hai Li was on his knees in front of his boss and in tears asked him for help. Jiao Lio looked at his phone indifferently and asked whether his subordinate was really threatened by Su Chen. As it turned out, the main character decided to write to the suspect directly and asked Li Zhuo if he was involved in Zhao Jinming's case, because otherwise he was going to investigate everything himself. Li Hai complained that Su Chen had some strange abilities and showed off his symbol on his hand. The place of the sign immediately began to burn strongly, which is why the man simply fell to the floor from such pain. Suddenly, some bright purple beam of energy flew into the bandit's hand. The person who sent him in held a bright sphere in his hands and told Li Hai that this symbol was just a trifle. It was a mysterious guy in a dark cape and with red eyes, who could not understand why the man yelled so loudly. Meanwhile, Li Hai noticed that the runes on his hand suddenly disappeared after the youth's magic. The man was scared when the magician suddenly came out of the shadows, and Jiao Lio asked why he only came now. Li Zhuo asked his friend if he could solve the problem with the annoying Su Chen. The guy approached Li Hai to analyze what curse our hero used. He concluded that Su Chen's spell was quite good. The magician was surprised that he had not heard of a man with this name before, although he had such strong abilities, and assumed that our hero was self-taught because of his unusual way of casting spells. In fact, he hated such people because he believed that developing abilities required a lot of resources, and such savages were all trying to squeeze into the ranks of magicians. Jiao Lio once again asked the guy, who was now hysterical about wanting to kill Su Chen, if he could handle him. In the end, he decided to leave the main character to his strong acquaintance, who was so eager to finish off the self-taught man. Meanwhile, Su Chen, unaware that he was being hunted, arrived at an abandoned factory. He walked closer and easily opened the gate to get inside the building. As it turned out, he and Li Hai had an appointment at this very place. The main character asked if the bandit was there, but no one answered him, so he went on his own to investigate the building. Li Hai suddenly appeared from the shadows, reacting too happily to the appearance of his second boss. With a smile on his face, he emphasized that the symbol on his hand that Su Chen had left suddenly disappeared for some reason, which is why the man called him to talk. The guy didn't like that Li Hai called him over such a trifle, but still asked him to show his hands. The bandit listened to his boss and began to fulfill the request, while our hero calmly stood in place, waiting. Now one could see that a new symbol appeared on the hand in the form of a green whirlwind with a two-headed snake. Su Chen did not have time to react to this turn of events, so the bandit was able to grab his hands without any problems. The man began to shout to his backup that he was able to catch the main character. The main character turned around and noticed that the same mysterious magician appeared behind him with a sphere in his hands. The guy was confident that it would definitely not be difficult to cope with Su Chen, given his weak abilities. Meanwhile, a green seal with snakes appeared on the floor, and our hero realized what his former subordinate's plan was. Using his magic, he summoned a huge green snake and was already preparing to deal with the hated self-taught man. He recommended that the main character finally admit that he is a simple person, and sent his magical pet in his direction. The magician even felt a little sorry for killing someone who could use high-level techniques. Of course, our hero was not going to give up, and also began to concentrate his energy to counterattack the enemy, and stated that in the modern world, few are able to achieve success in martial arts. As a result, the young man was able to summon a huge golden dragon, which definitely surpassed his opponent in size and strength. The dragon immediately rushed towards his opponent and simply bit the snake in half. The magician watched from the side as his pet disappeared into the air, and the dragon headed towards him. The guy was too self-confident and now could not understand how this was possible, not believing in his defeat. In front of such a huge creature, he could not do anything, so he simply looked with fear at the paw approaching him. In the end, the golden dragon simply stepped on its target and crushed it like a small bug. Our hero was still standing in the grip of Li Hai when a loud and bright explosion thundered behind them. Now the bandit saw the full power of his boss and again became afraid of such power. Then Su Chen decided to teach his subordinate a lesson and grabbed his hand tightly. Our hero said that now it was the bandit's turn to receive his lesson for this dastardly plan. Li Hai immediately fell down, began to cry, and promised that he would tell the main character everything he knew, just so that he would not be killed. He said that it was all because of Jin Ming, but Su Chen did not feel sorry for him and severe pain ran through the man's body. The magician, meanwhile, was still in his memory and said that he had prepared for the fact that Li Hai would turn out to be a complete weakling. As it turned out, everyone who betrays their master must die. Li Hai really began to simply choke on his own blood, and the main character realized that the magician was not lying at all. Suddenly, the police arrived at the scene in the form of officers named Xiao Su and Da Chen. Su Chen, with 2 corpses behind him, said that the police were a little late and it was all over a long time ago. He asked the officers to leave the premises and promised to help with the bodies of the 2 bandits. The police looked at each other and could not understand what our hero meant. Da Dong remembered that the day before yesterday, the commander asked them to contact Su Chen and carefully discuss the plan, which is why they did not sleep a wink all night. And everything was resolved so quickly. Still, the living magician was taken to the police station and interrogated whether he was involved in the murder of Zhao Jinming. The guy said with a grin that such trash wouldn't do the world any good anyway, so it doesn't matter who killed this simpleton. With a furious look, he advised the officers to worry about their lives, because the master magician would definitely not just leave it like that. The police looked at each other in bewilderment because they considered the detained guy rather strange and did not understand what he was talking about. The girl excitedly turned to our hero and said that if they really came for him, the police would not be able to help him. She asked if Su Chen had a plan for such a turn of events, but he did not answer immediately and became thoughtful. The guy didn't think long and, using magic, drew a small line at the door. He asked the officers not to worry, because this spell should be enough for protection. The police officers were now even more surprised when they saw the protagonist's methods. Meanwhile, all residents of the city already knew about the caught serial killer, who would very soon be convicted to the fullest extent of the law. Jiao Lio was incredibly angry when he heard this news about his strongest ally and called him a useless piece of crap. At that moment, his phone vibrated, and the contact of Zhao Lingshu, about whom the guy had already completely forgotten, was displayed on the screen. The young man promised his acquaintance to take revenge for his son, who was now in a state of being a vegetable, thinking that this issue would be resolved quickly and easily. But everything was not at all like that. In the end, Jiao Lio simply decided to avoid the man and immediately hung up. He decided to turn to Shenxi and ask if she could help in this situation. At the other end, a girl with real cat ears picked up the phone and asked about the fate of Mr. Zhao. As it turned out, the girl was already preparing with her brother for a trip to the city to meet with Su Qing. She asked the guy not to worry about the fact that the master took money from him and promised that everything would be done. But Jiao Lio did not want to listen to the girl and asked to call the master himself. Shenxi looked at her mentor, who was meditating on a mountain of corpses, and answered with awkwardness in her voice that he was a little busy right now. The practice of the dark magician looked rather gloomy because he drew his energy from the dead bodies of people. The cat girl stood up from her seat and asked the master if they could move out already. The man looked at his students and said in a grim voice that they should not let their targets die too quickly. After some time, Shen Qi and his brother had already reached the police station, where their partner was imprisoned. The girl thought it was ridiculous that such a strong master could not get out of a simple police station. Behind one of the doors, Shen Qi felt a familiar dark aura and realized that their comrade was there. She also saw a strange mark under the door and thought that the guy was afraid that they would not be able to go there. Shen Qi was confident in her abilities, so she immediately began using a spell to save her comrade. At the same moment, the protagonist's golden dragon burst out from the mark and defended this place. He opened his huge mouth and headed towards the shocked girl. Shen Qi did not expect to see a formation here, so she stood still and could not even somehow react to the danger. The golden dragon wrapped its body around her, completely immobilizing her, and the girl herself screamed for her brother to run away as quickly as possible because she believed that they could not cope with this formation. It was at this moment that the police decided to intervene in the situation, having heard a strange noise in their police station. Shen Qi began to worry about her brother even more. because now he was also threatened by police officers who could catch him. The girl begged her partner to run away as quickly as possible and tried with all her strength to help him with magic. She asked the guy to find and kill the one who created this formation, and then they could escape. The policeman was almost approaching the magicians, but the guy already had his sister's protective seal around him. Meanwhile, Su Chen and Mr. Meng were quietly playing board games at home. Their game was interrupted by Madame Meng, who wanted to introduce Xin Er's cousin named Yang Sha, who had been practicing Sanda abroad for several years and had recently returned to China. The mother explained that she wants to avoid unpleasant situations in the future, so she offers to make the girl her daughter's bodyguard. The head of the family believed that this was not necessary because Xin Er already had Su Chen, who could protect her at any time. The main character himself did not object to such a proposal because he really has a lot to do lately, because now he is cooperating with the police. Mrs. Meng laughed at our hero's story about him collaborating with the police because she thought it was complete nonsense. At this moment, Xin Er herself entered the room and was surprised when she saw her cousin. The mother immediately took her daughter by the arm and asked her what she thought about her sister becoming her bodyguard for a while, because then the woman would not have to worry about her daughter's safety. Meanwhile, Yang Sha came closer to our hero to get to know him. She asked if he was the same Su Cheng. The guy confirmed her guesses and asked how he could help her. The girl explained that her aunt told her a lot about the main character and emphasized that she usually does not interfere in other people's lives, but she also always treated Xin Er with special trepidation. Suddenly, Yang Sha shouted that the young man was not worthy of her cousin. The main character boldly replied that the girl does not understand not only martial arts, but also people. He suddenly moved the piece on the game table, which scared Mr. Ming. The girl did not know how to respond to such a comment in her direction, so she simply looked at our hero with a dissatisfied look. Sinner, standing up from his seat after defeating his grandfather, expressed his suspicions that Yang Sha was currently working on attacking techniques and advised her to change her approach to practice and emphasize speed. He explained that if a girl focuses only on physical strength, then when meeting an equal opponent, she will not last even a couple of attacks. Young Sha was shocked by such impudence on the part of the main character. Now she confirmed the words of her aunt that this guy was an arrogant insolent. Meanwhile, Xin Er felt that someone had touched his barrier at the police station. The main character was glad that his enemies were finally tired of doing nothing. He was also upset that one of them managed to escape. The guy did not hesitate any longer and took out 2 small talismans from his pocket. He approached his wife to give these amulets and asked her to always carry them with her to be safe. The girl did not understand what it was all about and asked where our hero was going for the night, looking, and the mother carefully examined the amulets and could not understand where the guy got them from. Meanwhile, one of the trapped magicians was watching the Ming family mansion, sitting in a tree not far from the building. As it turned out, he had already received information that Su Chen lived here. Meanwhile, Mrs. Meng was proving to her father that our hero could not be relied upon, because it was very suspicious that he was going somewhere in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, the magician who had come to take revenge on Su Chen jumped from the tree and landed in front of the open doors of the mansion. All the members of the Meng family were surprised and immediately looked at the intruder. He looked at them angrily and asked if everyone present was talking about Su Chen. Young Sha immediately took a fighting stance and asked who the unexpected guest was. The guy opened his mouth, making a loud sound, and replied that he had come to kill the main character. The sound wave was so strong that someone simply fell to their knees and someone was knocked off their feet by such a stream. Mrs. Meng began to have a severe headache, which made her daughter immediately afraid for her mother. The head of the family himself could not understand what was happening to them now. Meanwhile, Su Chen's amulets jumped out of the girl's hands and glowed brightly. The wards flew into the air and a golden dome formed over all the members of the Meng family. The girl immediately noticed that it was the same amulet that our hero gave her. At the same moment, Madame Meng noticed that her severe headache suddenly went away. The magician stood in shock because he could not understand how his enemies managed to block the attack, because there were no masters among them. Young Sha ordered the guy to shut his mouth and stressed that she would not allow him to harm her family again. He did not have time to react to the attack, so the girl had no problem hitting her opponent right in the chin. In fact, the magician did not feel any pain from this blow, so baring his teeth, he asked if the girl called this a real blow. Young Sha was shocked by this turn of events and did not think it was possible. She noticed that she didn't even leave a graze on the enemy's face. And meanwhile, the guy grabbed her hand and simply began to slam her body on the floor. Sinier and her mother, who watched this from the side, were very worried about the fate of Sha Sha. Meanwhile, the guy crushed young Sha Sha's face with his foot, and the girl herself thought that she was not much weaker than her opponent but still could not do anything about his attacks. Then she immediately remembered the words of the main character, who spoke about the important role of speed in her attacks, and admitted that he was still telling the truth. The magician had dealt with his enemy and was now calling Su Chen again to finally fight his main target. Suddenly, the voice of our hero appeared, saying that he had gone to the police in vain because the fish had escaped the net and swam into his hands. A huge golden foot stepped on the jock guy, who somehow tried to hold off this attack. In the end, he felt a lot of pressure and still could not hold the blow. As a result, the magical spirit of the protagonist simply sealed the seemingly powerful magician to the ground. A few seconds later, Su Chen himself appeared, who once again repeated that the guy should not have come to the mansion. At the same moment, police officers, to whom the main character entrusted the interrogation of the magician, ran into the door of the house. Mother and daughter were shocked when they saw that Su Chen was behind all this, and the guy himself asked if they were okay. Madame Meng was surprised that the police still came with the guy, so she asked him about it. Young Sha Sha was upset because her teacher always said that strength training is the basis of martial arts, but now our hero, who was against it, showed a technique much better than hers. The beaten girl found the strength to get up and approached the wise young man to ask if strength training really wasn't right for her. The main character turned to her and explained that if she was unable to repel even a couple of him, then it was pointless to continue focusing on strength. The girl immediately bowed to the boy and apologized for not listening to his advice, admitting that she was blind and arrogant. Sinner and her mother stood in shock, watching with interest this strange situation with Sha Sha and our hero. Meanwhile, Su Chen pathetically said that the ability to admit one's mistake and the desire to correct it is expensive. Referring to his mother-in-law, the protagonist said that Sha Sha is different from other ladies who still have not fulfilled the promise they made. Eventually, Su Chen heard the girl and decided to do a good deed for her. The young man put his hand on her head and agreed to help improve her fighting skills. Sha Sha immediately recognized that this was a knowledge transfer technique that only the greatest of masters could master. The girl could not believe that he had actually met a great master who was ready to teach her, and believed that this was great luck. Su Chen explained that he had taught her a series of exercises that would help her develop speed and agility, so now the girl could train on her own. Sha Sha thanked the main character and promised to justify his trust in her. Ordinary people cannot see the flow of spiritual power, so Meng Xin watched them in surprise and thought that a guy could easily defeat such a strong guy. Mrs. Meng decided to interrupt all this, so the poet pulled Sha Sha away and advised her not to believe our hero. The girl immediately threw away her aunt's hand and asked not to talk about her benefactor that way, because it was because of Mrs. Meng's words that she behaved unreasonably and ugly towards our hero. Sha Sha turned to the woman in absolute seriousness and asked her to apologize to Su Qing. Mrs. Meng immediately began to feel nervous at her niece's rhetoric and asked if she really said something wrong. Meanwhile, the police officers had already broken the arrested magician and informed the main character that everything was in order and they were going to their station. The guy promised to join them later, and Xin noticed that the police officers treated him very respectfully. The young man also reminded his grandfather not to forget to take the medicine that he left in Mr. Meng's office, because the toxins had been removed from his body, but there was still a lot of work to be done on his health. Mrs. Meng was still unhappy that our hero always seemed to be trying to please her father. The daughter could not stand such disrespect for the guy, so she asked her mother to stop clinging to him, because Su Chen helped their company and saved her grandfather, and that was enough to respect him. The woman did not expect that everyone would so abruptly go over to the side of the main character, so she did not even know how to respond to the accusations against her. She tried to stop her daughter because she believed that the girl was now possessed by Su Cheng, who, behind her words, was trying to deceive everyone. Further events continue 3 days later at the police station. Our hero had already arrived at the scene and asked the officers if they had managed to get any evidence. The police exhaled heavily and reported that that girl never woke up after Su Chen himself knocked her out with a spell, and the arrogant young man never said a word the entire time. But the girl also stated that they announced a reward of 100,000 yuan for any known information about magicians. At that moment, a woman ran into the office, greatly panicking because of something. As it turned out, she wanted to report some kind of crime, and the police immediately learned that it was the director of the Black Flower Bank named Li Ronghua. She immediately confirmed that it was her, and also said that she had information, but she was not interested in money, only help. The woman reported that someone was hiding in her home and watching her, and now she begged for help to catch her. The main character immediately became interested when he heard the story about the persecution of Li Ronghua. The head of the bank was shaking all over with fear and, having calmed down a little, began to tell that all this started about a month ago. She, shaking with incredible fear, stated that some strange aura was constantly hovering at home. At night, Li Ronghua, trying to fall asleep, constantly hears terrible sounds, as well as other people's steps. At first, the woman thought it was all due to stress, but one day she heard some screaming coming from the living room, so she decided to check and saw a dark figure sneaking around the room. She was sure that she didn't imagine anything. So, because of this, she hardly slept all this month. Because this figure comes into the house every night and cries over the painting that hangs in the living room. One day, Li Ronghua tried to catch this creature, but it was faster. And then the woman simply lost consciousness, after which the wounds on her body still hurt. Su Chen emphasized that the fact that the figure was crying over the painting was a very interesting fact, and asked him to describe this creature. The woman could not fulfill our hero's request because she did not see the figure due to darkness and severe stress. The guy recalled that this creature had hurt its victim, so he asked the victim to show her wounds. Then Li Ronghua stood up from her seat and, lifting her sweater, showed strange lacerations on her stomach. The police officers looked at the poor woman with fear and shock. Now everything was absolutely clear to the main character, so he asked if Li Ronghua needed help. The main character stood up and, stretching his hands, said that he could do anything. The woman entered her apartment with fear and asked Su Chen to be careful because the figure could attack him. The young man walked forward sharply and quickly, and Li Ronghua begged him not to leave her alone. The main character walked a little further and saw the very picture that the victim of the unidentified figure was talking about. The woman could not calm down her fear and asked if the young man, like her, had heard that someone was in the bedroom. Su Chen turned around and, taking Li Ronghua by the shoulder, said that everything was in order and there were no strangers in the house. He led the woman to the painting and showed that if you look closely, you can see a black silhouette, and then asked if the figure you saw looked like what was depicted in the painting. Li Ronghua actually noticed that they were similar when our hero pointed out this inconspicuous detail. This surprised the woman, but she could not understand what Su Chen was getting at. The main character explained that in reality the figure the woman saw did not exist, and it was all an illusion created by this picture. Li Ronghua was now completely confused, and the guy said that it was a painting called Observing the Sun, which Wang Menliang himself created in the prime of his career. Our hero explained that in the picture, it is not completely clear whether the person is looking at the sunset or the sunrise, which is where the sadness of the figure comes from. Although the master was in the prime of his life, this is not his best painting because in the same year, specifically by order of the emperor, he created another painting, Drunken Concubine, which brought him all the popularity and then ruined him. The picture of Observing the Sun was quite simple, but at the same moment it fully reflected the premonition of one's own death, which made me so sad, and its author was executed by order of the emperor. Li Ronghua could not understand why our hero was so confident in his strange guesses, and Su Chen explained that the painting itself told him its story. At that moment, the young man acted on the picture with the help of his magic, and a terrible figure immediately crawled out of it. The woman was seriously frightened when she saw her greatest fear in reality. Our hero began the process of sealing the monsters into the picture and asked Li Ronghua not to panic because he had everything under control. He explained that this sadly accumulated for almost 1,000 years because the author of the painting died about 3,000 years ago, and the figure became something like a projection of the author's thoughts, which could be transmitted to observers of the painting. Next, the young man asked Li Ronghua to bring a pen and paper, and she immediately ran to look for these items in her office. Having received all the necessary writing supplies, the main character began to create a new talisman. The woman still doubted that it could work, but the guy simply suggested that she check everything herself to find out the result. Li Ronghua was out of fear, but still approached the terrible monster, which was bound by the golden chains of our hero, in order to seal the figure in the picture with her own hands. At this moment, the figure's face became even more distorted. The woman screamed loudly in surprise, but still opened the scroll from Su Chen. Suddenly, a bright stream of energy burst out from the sheet of paper, because of which Li Ronghua simply fell to the ground, and the main character smugly said that it worked after all. Our hero stated that they had dealt with the issue of the victim of the painting, and now proposed to talk about another important topic. Su Chen recalled that the woman stated that she knew something about magicians, and she began her story about an incident that happened about 10 years ago and was known to a large number of people. Time in the city of Tianshui, there lived a master named Song Qingming, who practiced martial arts and was quite famous because he was #1 in all competitions. But one day, the master lost to a little-known warrior, and since then that guy challenged all the masters he met along the way and always won. His behavior caused dissatisfaction on the part of the practicing masters, and they conspired to attack him. During the battle, Master Song Qingming was seriously wounded and eventually left the city, and then a group of masters was assembled to ensure that he could not get back into the city. The 3 that the police caught were his students, whom he accepted after his expulsion. And the woman also heard that there are 4 of them in total. Although 3 of them are now in custody, they will definitely not give up easily. Li Ronghua added that the magic circle created around the city as an additional obstacle would soon lose its effectiveness, and she was sure that the master would definitely return for revenge. She believed that the police should have prepared for something like this in advance, since their enemy had definitely gotten stronger over the years. The woman thought that the police would prepare a trap for him to take him by surprise, but Su Chen seemed to have a different opinion. The main character confidently declared that he was ready to openly oppose Song Qingming. Now events are moved a few days ahead to the competitive arena. All of Song Qingming's disciples sat bound by Su Chen's powers in the middle of the stage. Viewers immediately learned that these were criminals who had recently been caught by the police. The 2 guys were just discussing the latest news and rumors about Song Qingming, which had spread very quickly throughout the city, and he is said to be returning here, so all residents are asked to be on guard. The police officer asked the main character, who remained completely calm, if this was enough to lure their target. The guy was sure that Song Qingming was a very hot-tempered person, so such tricks would drive him crazy, and he would start acting on his own. At the same moment, a strong explosion thundered among the competitive arena, which instantly confirmed the words of the main character. As it turned out, it was Song Qingming's disciple named Hu Bei, who came here because he was looking for Su Chen. Our hero was not at all afraid, and while drinking his tea, immediately revealed his identity. Hu Bei was unhappy that his comrades were defeated by Su Chen, whom he called a skinny monkey comma, and stated that the training of all the students was in vain. The magician did not wait any longer and attacked the main character to kill him, and then take all the students to the carpet to the master. The young man did not interrupt his turn and put out his fist to meet his opponent to stop his attack. After this collision, a strong wave was formed, which knocked down Hu Bei himself and the police officer who stood next to the main character. The magician was unable to withstand such force and simply flew several meters away, breaking all the asphalt under his body. Su Chen pretended that nothing had happened and simply said that the aroma of the tea was so pleasant that it directly enveloped him. Hu Bei lay helplessly on the ground and couldn't believe that the main character was so strong. He gathered his last thoughts because he no longer had any other choice but to use the teacher's secret method. In the end, the magician was able to get up from the ground and, deciding not to hesitate any longer, attacked his main target. Okay, the hero immediately sensed the danger behind him and reacted to it. Without straining at all, Su Chen hit her opponent straight in the stomach with all her strength, stopping his unexpected attack. Hu Bei was unable to react and block our hero's blow, so he simply began coughing up blood from such a strong attack. As a result, the magician again flew several meters away, but now fell into a tree that stood nearby. Su Chen stretched his hand and regretted that he missed and almost broke all the trees in the park. Even though Hu Bei was now badly injured and had a huge bruise on his stomach, he laughed quietly as he sat under the tree. The police officer was very surprised by this behavior of the magician, so she asked what was funny. In fact, the magician had already accepted the fact that our hero was very strong, but still did not want to just come to terms with this fact. He decided to use his teacher's curse, which would definitely leave no chance for the main character. Once the soul is activated, the flesh, skin, and bones of the damned will be completely corroded within just 3 hours, meaning Su Chen will simply turn into a bloody puddle. Now Hu Bei was looking forward to the moment when the main character would begin to beg for mercy. Having received such a strong curse, the guy was shocked that Soul Devour was cast on him, and the police officer watched with tears in her eyes. In the end, the young man simply dispelled this spell and stated that he invented it when he was only 5 years old in order to easily get rid of garbage. Hu Bei couldn't believe that this was actually possible, and behind his words, a weak master could dispel the Soul Eater's aura. Meanwhile, Su Chen stretched his fists and asked what his opponent was saying about begging for mercy. In the end, the young man simply attacked the magician and, without stopping, began to beat him. As a result, the magician fell right in front of his comrades, who also did not expect such an outcome of events. The main character was again able to calmly sit down in his place and continue drinking his wonderful tea, smugly declaring that now all 4 mice had caught up. Now the young man was just going to wait for the big fish in the form of Song Qingming to take the bait. As it turned out, Jiao Lio and the master were watching this from the side, and the guy demanded that Mr. Song finally intervene in this situation, because the behavior of the main character was already too much. Li Zhuo also noticed that in his acquaintance's hands was the corpse of a martial artist from the Chen family. He had previously heard that the old man had participated in the city against Song Qingming, and now he had suffered such a tragic fate. The master admitted that Su Chen should not be underestimated because he was able to remove the curse from you. And then the man asked Jiao Lio if he had prepared what Song Qingming asked for. The guy would never dare to contradict him, so he clapped his hands so that his people would bring what Li Zhuo would prepare. At the same second, the guard rolled out a table on which stood a strange pot with unknown contents. Jiao Lio walked to the table and opened the vessel so that Song Qingming could evaluate what was inside. And he thanked the guy with a smile. The master began to draw out the dark energy that was in the red substance in this pot. Next, he transmigrated this unknown spirit into the corpse of the old master in his hands. After his successful performance, Song Qingming laughed loudly because he was already imagining how the main character dies. The Dark Master was sure of the curse because no one had ever managed to survive after it. At the same moment, from the roof of the building where Song Qingming stood, a large amount of dark energy began to spread throughout the competition arena. Su Chen immediately felt bad and clutched his heart, and his police assistant was afraid for the young man's condition. Dark energy negatively affected the state of the main character, but he asked the girl not to approach so as not to endanger her. There was also a sudden change in the weather, because the sky became overcast with dark clouds and thunderstorms suddenly appeared. The officer immediately noticed these changes, and our hero tried to control himself, even though the influence of Song Qingming's energy was becoming greater. Finally, the young man realized that this phenomenon was associated with a strong spell of unknown origin. Su Chen then ordered the police officer to immediately evacuate people and ask everyone in the square and nearby to run away immediately. Meanwhile, Song Qingming stood on the roof of the building and laughed evilly, delighting in his trick, while Jiao Lio watched with fear in his eyes. The Dark Master's eyes became completely white, and he stated that for a long time this world has not been as lively as it is now. The man was going to use the blood of the main character to inform the whole city about his return. Su Chen raised his head up and noticed that 3 huge lightning bolts were flying towards him from the sky. As a result, they all ended up in the place where our hero was standing, and the police officer was very scared when she saw what happened to Master Su. At the same time, Song Qingming simply burst into evil laughter because he thought that this was his final victory. After just a short period of time, a very bright flash of light appeared at the place where Su Chen was. The Dark Master watched this process with surprise and could not understand what happened to his spell. This explosion was so strong that fragments of asphalt flew in different directions, which is why all the people around had to hide somewhere. Even Song Qingming himself, who was standing on the roof of the building, was hit by this explosion, which made him even more shocked. "Guard?" Jiao Lio grabbed his boss's leg and he screamed for the man to let him go, but the man was too afraid for his life. Meanwhile, Song Qingming could not understand how it was possible that his own amulet simply began to walk around before his eyes. It turned out that the main character was able to survive the lightning strike, and now he looked at his main enemy with a grin on his face. Thus, the guy was finally able to find his target, which was on the roof of the building. Song Qingming began to panic because his spell not only did not cause any harm, but now the young man also managed to calculate his location. The main character boldly asked if this was all his opponent was capable of, and stated that in this case he sincerely felt sorry for the master. Meanwhile, Song Qingming's amulet was almost burnt to ashes by Su Chen's spell. At that moment, the Dark Master began to scream loudly because he understood that this was the end for him. Now, another explosion thundered on the roof of the building, and then the main character realized that he had completed his mission and eliminated Song Qingming. The man fell from the roof along with the fragments from the blast wave, and during his flight, he thought about how this could happen. He couldn't believe that he could lose again to some unknown upstart, and he wasn't ready to just give up. Eventually, Song Qingming fell to the ground and was now lying lifeless among a pile of stones. Meanwhile, Jiao Lio and his assistant sat at the collapsed edge of the roof and could not believe that our hero was such a strong warrior. The guy ordered the guard to leave and try not to get caught by our hero or the police, but the man was very panicked and did not understand where to go. Li Chuo asked the employee to go to Fengxing, and he himself was going to tell the master that Song Qingming was dead. Master Qianlong was Song Qingming's teacher, so he would definitely be furious when he found out that Su Chen killed his student. And the guy himself could not believe that Su Chen would be able to oppose the Supreme Master. Meanwhile, the news reported that the police had caught a criminal who committed several premeditated murders in the city of Tianshui, as well as 4 accomplices. They also talked about our hero, who helped detain dangerous criminals and received a reward of 2 million for this. Jiao Lio. At that moment, he was watching TV and now wanted to find Jiao Lio because he still had not removed the hated Su Chen. Meanwhile, the assistant informed her boss that the guy had left the city with his people and, judging by the route, was heading to Fengxing. The man was shocked by this news and began to guess that Li Juo had gone to Master Jianlong. He also remembered that this was a fairly strong master, as well as Song Qingming's teacher. In the past, when Song Qingming had 2 masters one after another, it was Qianlong who helped his disciple escape. So the man decided to be patient and just wait. Meanwhile, Officer Xiao Su wrote to the main character that they knew that behind Song Qingming there was another practitioner who once helped him escape and asked the guy to be careful. At this moment, Su Chen was riding in the car with Mr. Wang, so he asked him about the master named Qianlong. Then the old man said that several decades ago his name was a household name. But since his best student left the city, he practically does not appear in public. With the help of his thunder technique, Qianlong held the fears of the entire province, and witnesses say that his skills are incredible. Some even believe that he is an immortal. At the same moment, the driver stopped the car because they had arrived at the right place. Mr. Wang was sure that such a person would not just leave everything, but this did not frighten the main character at all. Meanwhile, some rather strange car was approaching them at full speed, which Su Chen immediately noticed. The young man immediately reacted to the danger and pushed the old man far away from the car, which was driving very fast and did not stop in front of people. As it turned out, it was Jiao Lio and old man Qianlong, whom the guy had already brought to the city. The master looked at our heroes with a crazy look and asked if they had any problems. Mr. Wang did not recognize the famous master and could not understand why the old man was so creepy. And the main character immediately felt that same murderous aura. Su Chen was actually not afraid at all and suggested that his friend hurry up, because the auction was about to begin, and he himself wondered what kind of insidious plan Jiao Lio had come up with. At this moment, a considerable number of people had already gathered in the hall and wanted to take part in the auction. Mr. Wang promised to repay our hero, so today he agreed to buy everything the young man wanted. Well, he was only interested in one single thing. Su Chen wanted to get a special elixir that was over 10,000 years old to take to the old man. Although the guy didn't think he would ask for something like that. It was at this moment that the auction host announced that the next lot was an elixir of millennium, the starting price of which was 2 million. Mr. Wang immediately raised his sign with the number 280 and named the price at 3 million. Other auction participants respected the old man and said that their families would not interfere, and Mr. Wang thanked them from the heart for their kindness. Suddenly, Master Qianlong burst into the race, holding up his plate with the number 150 and announcing a price of 6 million, shocking all the other participants. Mr. Wang looked towards his opponents with aggression because he did not expect that anyone would be able to go against him. He immediately raised his number 280 and outbid him, calling a new bid of 7 million. Number 150 was not going to be outdone by his opponent, so he immediately decided to double the price and called the bet 14 million. Other members thought it was strange that the Zhao family would allow itself to go against Mr. Wang, and some guessed that this was due to the cooperation of the Wang family with the Meng family. The wig wasn't going to stop there, so he raised his number 280 in the air. Then the main character decided to intervene in the race, who explained that the elixir was hardly worth 10 million, so Mr. Wang had no need to continue bargaining. Su Chen asked the old man not to worry about this because he was still going to find a way to get the Millennium Elixir. Meanwhile, the presenter joyfully began the countdown to the closing of the auction for this elixir. At the last moment, the main character raised his unnumbered hand and announced that he wanted to offer his bet. Mr. Wang did not understand the young man's action, because he himself said that it was not worth that kind of money, but he still continued to bargain. Jiao Lio also wanted to see how long our hero would persist to get the desired elixir. In fact, Su Chen did not intend to pay the money, but offered the wolf mercenary token. All auction participants were shocked by such a bid, and now looked carefully at the strange young man. Tianlong was also surprised when he heard about the wolf mercenary from the lips of the main character. As it turned out, it was the king of mercenaries, who is known even abroad. They say that even the presidents of countries are not always able to convince him to help them. The presenter also heard that Mr. Wolf has a special token, and asked if our hero could demonstrate it. Su Chen agreed without a doubt, and took out a rare treasure from his robe pocket. The guy handed the token to the presenter's assistant, who immediately carried it onto the stage on a pillow for demonstration. The girl was surprised to take the coin with the image of a wolf in her hands and began to carefully examine it from all sides. In the end, she banged the hammer and joyfully announced to the whole room that this was definitely not a fake, but a real wolf token. At the current auction rate, the value of this token is as much as 10 billion, which is why all participants were in silent shock. Mr. Wang himself and Jiao Lio were also shocked that their acquaintances had such huge wealth in just one small coin. Now the presenter named the final price of $10 billion and again began the countdown to the end of the auction. Jiao Lio at this moment began to panic because he would not be able to handle such amounts. But Master Qianlong himself was well aware of the whole situation. Meanwhile, the girl banged her hammer and announced that the elixir of millennium had been sold for 10 billion. The main character folded his hands and thanked everyone for giving him the elixir. Qianlong Wu's son was irritated by his defeat, so he nervously grabbed the chair with his hand with very long nails. The presenter named the next lot A, namely a pill, which can greatly facilitate the creation of the foundation for the one who accepts it. With a starting price of 30 million, the old master was not going to give up, so he raised the number 150 and announced a bet of 60 million. Jiao Lio jumped up from his seat and emphasized to the whole room that his master really needed this pill. He sarcastically asked them to understand him and not be too upset when he takes the pill for himself. Friends, the participants only now began to realize that Master Qianlong himself was fighting for the pill, and now, out of fear, they simply refused to participate in the auction. The presenter asked if anyone else wanted to place a bet, and then started counting down to the end. Qianlong and Jiao Lio now sat in the fact that they had won this auction, and the other participants looked at them with suspicion. The stern old master even allowed himself to smile, then he felt the taste of victory. Meanwhile, the main character began to analyze the external signs and smell of the pill, and for some reason it seemed to him that it was a fake. As a result, the young man nevertheless noticed that its color was too dull and its aroma was rather weak. So he concluded that the fact was that it had been made too long ago. Then he turned around and asked Mr. Wang if he was afraid of this Master Qianlong. The old man replied that he completely trusted Su Chen because now he did not think that he should be afraid when there was a person nearby who personally knew the king of mercenaries. Hearing this answer, our hero took his friend's number to continue bidding for the pill. With number 280 in hand, Su Chen confidently named the price at 100 million to outbid his opponents. Qianlong, of course, he was not going to give up, so he named the price at 108 million. But Jiao Lio was already having a hard time accepting such huge sums. The main character also did not intend to lag behind, so he named the bet at 116 million, and Mr. Wang could not understand whether the young man really needed this thing. Then the old master called 130 million, but Jiao Lio could not afford such an amount because this was all his savings at the moment. It was at this moment that the main character finally decided to give up, because this was too high a price for the enhancement pill. The young man noticed that Jiao Lio was already almost at his limit, and was now glad that he got to the auction and could now take revenge on his opponent. He pretended that he was simply succumbing to the atmosphere, because he had never seen such active trading, and asked if Mr. Wang was scared. Jiao Lio heard this conversation and could not believe that all his savings were spent to interrupt Su Chen's simple interest. Now our hero believed that he could leave here, and Mr. Wang promised that his driver would take the young man home. Bidders began to guess that the guy did this on purpose, and believed that this was like a public slap in the face to the Jiao family. Jiao Lio was incredibly angry that the main character allowed himself to humiliate his family like that. Qianlong was unhappy and asked what was wrong with the young man, guessing that he simply did not have enough money anymore. Jiao Lio promised that he would pay for everything, but also fearfully reminded that the old man had promised him something. The master promised that Su Chen would regret the day he was born, and he also planned to turn the birthday of one member of the Meng family into a feast of death. The old man turned to his people and ordered them to go after the main character, while he himself wanted to stay at the auction and buy a couple more things. Meanwhile, Su Chen walked between the houses and thought about how pleasant it was for him to piss off Jiao Lio. It turns out that our hero felt from the very beginning that all this time someone was following him and watching him, so he turned to his pursuers. They praised Su Chen's abilities because he finally noticed us, but the agents were going to teach him a lesson because the guy offended someone he shouldn't have. They rushed forward to finally deal with their master's main enemy. At this time, Jiao Lio had already smoked a considerable amount of cigarettes due to his nerves, and Qianlong was waiting for the guy in the car. The guy asked the master why two of his people had not returned yet, and already thought that something had happened to them. Qianlong was confident in his men and did not think that Jiao Lio himself could find more experienced mercenaries, because the life of each of them was worth at least 5 billion. In addition, a group of foreign mercenaries tracked them for 5 days and 4 nights, but could not even pick up their trail, so the old man was sure that our hero was simply doomed. The old man promised that tomorrow the news would say that Su Chen's body was found in some ditch, and Jiao Lio replied that that would be great. Meanwhile, on a huge TV that hung on the building in front of the car, the presenter announced breaking news. Photos of Qianlong's mercenaries and an announcement appeared on the screen that 2 fugitive criminals had been arrested thanks to the active citizens of the country. Then a video appeared with the main character standing with an award in his hands for the title of honorary citizen. Qianlong got out of the car because he couldn't believe that this actually happened. And now he was even more angry with the young man because he dared to touch his people. Now the old man wanted everyone to know that anyone who worked with the Meng family would become his enemy, and Jiao Lio happily agreed to this. The guy asked Qianlong not to worry, because he believed that Su Chen could not escape, and said that in 2 days Meng Hao would have a birthday, and Jiao Lio was going to find reporters to ruin their family. When the time came, Jiao Lio was going to tell everyone that the main character was to blame for all the troubles, which would definitely disgrace him. Qianlong looked at the guy and expressed his hopes that this plan would work. Meanwhile, our hero had already returned home and wanted to see how his new acquisition worked. At the same moment, Mengxian and her parents were gathered in the living room, not in the best mood. Su Chen was surprised when he saw this strange picture and thought that the end of the world had come. Mrs. Meng immediately began to blame our hero for the fact that now their family had become the object of public criticism, but the young man did not understand at all what was going on. Mengsung didn't like his wife's words like that because he still respected the guy for what he did for their family and considered him not to blame. And the woman couldn't understand why her husband was shielding the main character. In the end, Jin intervened in the quarrel and asked her parents to finally calm down and stop arguing. The adults listened to their calm daughter and turned away from each other with displeasure. The girl explained that tomorrow would be her grandfather's birthday, but because of recent events, it seemed like everyone was up in arms against their family. She said that no matter who the Meng family sent an invitation to, everyone refused. Madame Meng remembered that they used to literally line up to get an invitation, so now the woman could not bear to watch this horror. Sinner added that they haven't told Grandpa about this yet, so as not to upset him because they are worried about his condition. The main character did not think that the family should worry about this, because Grandfather Meng did a lot of good things for everyone and could not spoil his reputation with anything. The guy reassured them that water did not flow under a lying stone and recommended that everyone rest a little. Mrs. Man thought that our hero didn't care at all because he was not a member of the Man-Kama family and regretted that Grandfather valued the young man so much. Mengsung didn't like his wife's behavior at all, so he shouted and ordered her to finally shut up. As a result, a strong quarrel began between the injections, and Xin simply turned away and left because she could not watch it. The next day, the head of the family happily got ready for his birthday and thought that a good suit always makes him look younger, no matter how old he is. Grandfather was already quite a few years old, but today he still wanted to celebrate his day well and have a good drink. After Mr. Meng got ready, he went out into the hall where he immediately met his son, who said that he had a friend who dealt in antiques and had put aside something worthwhile for his father, so the man was going to leave for a while. The old man felt sad because of such coldness on the part of his son, and he thought that Meng Xiang was completely unlucky and had stopped loving his own father. Then Mr. Meng decided to sit on the sofa when Mrs. Meng came out from the corridor, who asked why grandfather got up so early, and he noticed that the woman was also getting ready somewhere. She nervously explained that she had some small business to attend to and that her friends had invited her to breakfast, so Mrs. Then the main character came into the hall and wished his grandfather good morning. Mr. Meng immediately became happy when he saw his pet and looked at the young man with hope in his eyes. In fact, our hero also decided to run away from home and said that he needed to give some documents to his wife. In the end, grandfather was left completely alone on his own birthday and was now sitting completely alone on the sofa. Mr. Meng was very upset because everyone was so busy today. At this moment, a loud ringing of the phone comes from the grandfather's pocket, to which he immediately drew attention. He would have been greeted by Lao Chao, who supposedly wanted to come to his birthday but decided to limit himself to a simple call. In the end, Mr. Mayer's friend decided not to beat around the bush for a long time and honestly said that everyone had turned their backs on the Meng family, asking whether grandfather had crossed someone's path. Lao Zhou unfortunately could not help, so he decided to personally call Mr. Meng and tell him everything, and now he understood why all his friends were behaving so strangely today. Upset because no one directly told him about the problems. All morning, Jinner called friends from her grandfather and begged them to come, but no one agreed. Very soon it will start to get dark, and the girl still hasn't solved this problem, so she was nervous about the unsuccessful birthday of her loved one. At that moment, Secretary Lu appeared in the corridor with a gift in her hands and called her boss. The girl knew that today was Mr. Ming's birthday, so she prepared several gifts for him and hoped that he would like it, and Xin thanked her employee and said that it was very nice of her. She thought that the celebration in honor of her 60th birthday should be grandiose. So she wanted to buy something more expensive, but she got so busy that she completely forgot about it. Secretary Liu guessed that there would be quite a lot of people, which made her a little embarrassed to give such a simple gift in front of everyone, so she asked to hand it over in person. Senior tried to gently explain to her employee the whole situation that remained with her family, but she did not listen to her. At this moment, the main character intervened in their conversations, thanking the secretary for her concern and asking if she would go to today's banquet. Su Chen explained that he was running around a lot, which is why he forgot to give the employee an invitation card, and she promised to come there immediately after work. But Xin could not understand at all what our hero was up to. Next, the young man took his wife by the hand and announced that a car was already waiting for them outside. Still, the girl decided to ask where the main character could get the invitation if there was no party. Su Chen pretended that he did not understand what Xin was talking about and emphasized that today was such a significant day. The girl could not stand it and burst into tears because she was sure that there would be no celebration today. The main character asked his beloved not to worry and, taking her by the cheek, promised that everything would work out somehow. The guy smiled wholeheartedly and asked Jin to just trust him and not be nervous anymore. The girl immediately listened to her husband, but still could not understand what he decided to come up with. After some time, our heroes arrived at a hotel called Jinbi. When they entered the hotel, they were immediately attacked by a whole horde of reporters who wanted to interview them. They asked if the Meng family would host a party this year to celebrate their head's 60th birthday, since they still hadn't sent out any invitations. The main character smiled and stated that the reception would take place as planned before, and also invited all the reporters to the Jinbi Hotel. Journalists immediately began actively photographing our heroes, and the hotel staff tried to disperse them all. Sinner asked her husband if he had booked this hotel. He replied that they needed to celebrate somewhere. It seemed that the hotel had already set up a huge banquet hall, but the girl was sure that no one would come to this celebration anyway. The girl started screaming that someone was targeting their family because she herself tried to invite someone, but everyone refused. In the end, at least Jiang Zhishui came to the celebration, who thought that he had made a mistake with the timing. The main characters greeted Mr. Jiang and replied that he was just in time. The man explained that he didn't know what gift to choose, but he heard that Mr. Meng liked to drink, so he bought a bottle of wine that was already a good 100 years old. Xin immediately recognized that it was the officer who helped them with company affairs, and could not understand whether our hero was so close to him. She couldn't believe that Su Chen had orchestrated all this alone, but she still believed that seeing Mr. Jiang would not save the critical situation. At that moment, the doors opened and Mr. Wang and his son entered the hall, who loudly congratulated Mr. Meng on his birthday. The girl was surprised because she did not expect to see even such a small number of guests. Mr. Wang apologized for being late and explained that there were traffic jams on the road, and the main character reassured him because the banquet had not yet started. His son opened the suitcase he was holding and said that it was a small gift for Mr. Meng. Then Mr. Li arrived, who brought peaches made of pure gold as a symbol of longevity, and Li Ronghua, the president of the bank, presented a black VIP card as a gift, and then other guests arrived. Sinner was shocked that the main character could achieve such a result. In the end, all of Su Chen's acquaintances gathered and happily agreed to congratulate Mr. Ming. The main character thanked Mr. Sun for being able to come with his granddaughter, but he believed that this excessive politeness was useless because receiving an invitation was already a great honor for him. Sinner watched this carefully and noticed that all the invited people had a very high position, so she was sure that even if their family had not been attacked, it was unlikely that they would have been able to see all these people at the reception. Meanwhile, Juju turned to our hero and said that she had invited some of her friends and asked if the guy was not against such an idea. Suddenly, the arrival of the birthday boy himself was announced, with whom his son and wife also came, and they were all surprised by such a large-scale reception. Everyone unanimously congratulated Mr. Ming and wished him long life and good health. Grandfather immediately guessed that it was all organized by Su Chen, but he said that everyone came here because they admired the head of the family, and Madame Meng was unhappy that the young man was supposedly sucking up, but that was not the case at all. As a result, even Lao Jiang arrived at the celebrations, whom I had previously said would not be able to come, but still visited his friend and decided to give him an antique vase. The comrade explained that after much thought, he realized that he could not leave Mr. Meng alone on such an important day. But now he saw quite a lot of people and now he thought that he had misunderstood something. Then all the guests joyfully greeted Mr. Zhang with one voice, and he happily answered them. Now the birthday boy himself greeted all his guests, who arrived a little later with a smile on his face. All this happened in front of the cameras of reporters, whom Su Chen also invited to the birthday celebration. Immediately, these photos spread across the internet with the news that many famous guests were present at the reception in honor of Mr. Meng Zhuan's birthday at the best hotel in the city. Jiao Lio had been following the news all day, so he immediately saw this and was incredibly angry that the Meng family dared to restore their reputation so quickly. In a fit of rage, the guy ordered his people to send the coffin to this hotel in order to congratulate the hated birthday boy. The assistant, with fear in her voice, answered her boss that it was unlikely that anyone would dare to go to that place. Then Master Meng Sheng intervened in the conversation, expressing his desire to independently cope with this task and personally appear at the birthday celebration. Last time, the old man didn't have enough time because of Su Chen, but now he wanted to fulfill his promise and turn the Meng family's holiday into a funeral. Meanwhile, at the hotel, the host announced the speech of the hero of today's celebration and asked the guests to pay attention to the stage. A happy Mr. Meng took the microphone in his hands and thanked everyone for attending the reception in honor of his birthday. At the same moment, the main character heard hotel employees trying to stop some uninvited guest. Eventually, several men burst into the hall, carrying the coffin on their shoulders to the music, followed by Master Qianlong. The old man with an evil grin on his face said that he came here to personally congratulate the chairman. The guests immediately recognized Master Qianlong and were unhappy that he came on such a day, believing that this was too much. At this time, a group of the old man's assistants had already placed the coffin in the middle of the festive hall, and the organizer of this performance himself watched with satisfaction. They noticed that a golden seal suddenly appeared on the floor around them. This behavior of the uninvited guests greatly angered the main character, so he immediately asked who invited them to the holiday. At the same moment, a huge paw of the golden dragon came out from the place of the seal, which scattered all the men in different directions. As a result, the uninvited guests simply flew out of the hotel along with their terrible gift in the form of a coffin. We didn't have time to see anything, so we thought that the wind had suddenly come from somewhere and carried everyone out into the street, but still we decided to simply not pay attention to it. The old man remained in the hall, and our hero stated that this would be his last chance. Therefore, while the guy counts to 3, the master must leave so as not to suffer because of his stubbornness. He continued to stand his ground, so he started counting down, expecting that Qianlong would finally leave and not interfere. Qianlong, of course, did not follow the protagonist's orders and summoned his magical pet in the form of a huge black panther. Su Chen was not at all scared by this, so he finished his countdown and began preparing for battle. The young man warned that the old man himself asked for such an outcome and directed the golden dragon in his direction. Qianlong was outraged that our hero allowed himself to use his spiritual form against him. As a result, the old man's Black Panther and Su Chen's Golden Dragon clashed in a fierce battle. The dragon was able to defeat his opponent without any problems, causing him and his owner to simply fly helplessly to the side. Qianlong remained on his feet and was surprised when he saw that the dragon was not hurt at all after his attack. He felt that something was wrong, because one spiritual form could only be damaged by another stronger one. And the old man was sure that the youth's level was clearly lower than his. Zizajia asked her grandfather if our hero could defeat Qianlong, but he was also sure that the old man was on a completely different level compared to the guy. Despite this, the grandfather was confident that the guy would still be able to defeat his opponent. Meanwhile, the golden dragon had already taken the initiative again and was simply immobilizing its opponent. In the end, the protagonist's pet simply tore the Black Panther in half with his huge paw. After a successful attack, the golden dragon let out a loud roar, and Qianlong was able to defend himself at the last moment, and now she began to sense traces of rare spiritual energy in our hero, which is different from the usual and is very difficult to cultivate. Even if a person sat and ate medicinal herbs for decades, he would not be able to gain such strength because inclusions of such energy make its owner 100 times stronger than an ordinary person. The old man remembered that a decade ago, the master who was considered the best in the country had the same power. He began to suspect something because he heard that the man's disciple had come down from the mountain to practice in the city. Qianlong understood that if his guesses turned out to be true, he had no right to just stand and look at such a strong guy. In fact, the old man thought about his guesses for too long, so the golden dragon had already reached him and threw him into the air. With such a strong blow, Qianlong was unable to stay on his feet and was now coughing up blood. Dr. Li was also shocked by this development and thought that the old master had simply decided to surrender to the protagonist. At that moment, the old man's assistants returned to the hall, who were frightened when they saw the state of their master. They started talking about how Su Chen was not even worth Qianlong's finger and were confident that he would crush the guy in just a few seconds. The old man considered them a pathetic pile of garbage, incapable of anything. So he simply drove them away and ordered them to finally leave him alone. All the other guests did not see the spiritual strength of the two fighters, so they could not understand why the old man and our hero decided to fight so abruptly. Su Chen had already calmed down his dragon, and Qianlong suddenly knelt before his opponent. The old man admitted that he was mistaken when he decided to go against the main character, not knowing who his master was, and expressed hope that the guy would show mercy and let him go. Su Chen did not understand what Qianlong was talking about and asked whose student he was. It seems that our hero had no idea about the identity of his teacher and now did not understand at all such a sharp change in his opponent's mood. The young man was surprised that the old man knew his master and did not understand what was so special about him. Therefore, he began to guess that Qianlong knew a little more information about the teacher. The main character decided to take advantage of this situation and let go of the old man who had been playing. Qianlong decided not to linger for a second next to such a strong fighter and quickly ran away from the hall. Of course, the guy was not going to just let the old man go and told him to stop, which made him seriously scared. He didn't want to deal so easily with the person who was trying to ruin Mr. Meng's birthday, and emphasized that the old man should just roll. Qianlong immediately obeyed the protagonist and literally fulfilled his wishes, while the old man's people looked in surprise at his humiliation. Then Su Chen looked aggressively at the old man's assistants, and they immediately realized that they also needed to run away from here as quickly as possible. They followed the example of their master and literally rolled out of the banquet hall. In the end, our hero turned to the guests and expressed his hopes that such a trifle did not spoil their impression of the holiday. In fact, the guests felt uncomfortable after such an interruption of the celebration, and they also believed that driving away such a strong master was definitely not a small thing. Meanwhile, Meng Xin-er had already sat down at the piano and announced to the whole hall that she had some idea. She touched the keys of the instrument with her hands and played a beautiful melody to slightly dilute the tense situation. The girl had real talent, so all the guests relaxed back in their studio and listened to the music with pleasure. Su Chen also listened to the composition with pleasure and felt some special energy in it. Now he understood that music was Meng Xin-er's unique way of cultivation. After a while, the girl got up from the piano, having finished playing her melody, but did not hear any applause, so she began to think that everything was so bad. The main character was the first to clap and called this melody magnificent, comparing it to the music of heaven. Xin-er was very embarrassed and blushed when she saw such strong support from her husband. After Su Chen, there was a standing ovation from other listeners, and some guests even burst into tears because the melody reminded them of deceased loved ones. The girls liked to hear only praise in their direction, so she bowed with a smile on her face and thanked everyone for listening to her play the piano. She remembered that she still had not had the opportunity to thank our hero for today, so she decided to do it right now. The young man noticed that just one song made the guests feel such a storm of emotions. Our hero believed that the girl's musical skills were excellent, so he wanted to help her open up even more. Mengxiang left the event in a very good mood and could not stop praising Su Chen and calling him a real talent. The man also had a little too much alcohol, so he gave his daughter strange advice and asked her not to let another woman take away such a good husband. Mrs. Meng decided to teach her husband a lesson for having too much to drink and asked him to calm down, because he was no longer in control of himself. She did not calculate her strength and hit her husband too hard that he fell to the floor, and the main character immediately ran up to check the condition of his father-in-law. Then the young man said that Mengxiang had really had too much and was going to take him home, and Xin Er allowed our hero to use her car. After some time, Su Chen and his wife and father-in-law were already rushing home by car. Mengxiang asked the main character what he gave to her father, who praised him so much all evening, as if the young man was the best man in the world. Su Chen replied that he definitely couldn't put anything on his father-in-law, and suggested that he was so good on his own. The girl said that our hero had been with them for more than a month, so she handed him a card on which was his salary and a small bonus, and asked the young man to buy himself something as a gift because she had been too busy lately. The guy happily accepted his gift, but also asked what his wife was doing. Then she recalled that all the old personnel of the company were lured to the other side, and now, thanks to the formula given by the main character, things went uphill again. The problem was that after this, competitors released their own new skincare product, and with the help of a smart marketing move, they were able to occupy a significant part of the market. Because of this, Meng's company began to face criticism more often. So Xin Er wanted to come up with something new to return to the previous level and attract one good pharmacist. She asked her people to contact Lu Juofei, a professor of pharmacology who had recently retired and could improve the situation in the company. Now, the main character realized that the girl was indeed busy, but also stated that he was not chilling and heard that Juofei was not very willing to make contact, so it would not be so easy for him to spend the night. Then Su Chen took out a small jar from his clothes and handed it to his wife, who immediately asked what it was. Our hero explained that he does not always have the opportunity to be nearby, so he decided to give the girl this amulet to protect her. Mengxiang was surprised by such an amulet. Then she decided to open the jar and heard a very pleasant aroma, so she asked if it could be used to make perfume or something similar. The guy left this decision to the discretion of Xin Er herself and promised to give more of this ingredient if it runs out. The girl smiled warmly and thanked the main character from the bottom of her heart for such help. Meanwhile, the driver had already brought them to the Meng family mansion, so Su Chen got out of the car and tried to carefully guide Mengxiang home. Our hero took his father-in-law under the shoulder, and he said goodbye to his wife who did not intend to stay at home. In the end, the girl decided to thank Su Chen for this wonderful evening, and said that lately she has been increasingly noticing what a wonderful person he is. The main character did not expect such an attitude towards himself at all, so with a question in his eyes, he once again turned to Xin Er. The girl also brought the jar with the fragrant substance to her lips and once again thanked Su Chen for this gift, saying that they could still have some kind of relationship. Our hero did not have time to answer anything because he was shocked by such frankness from the girl and simply silently looked after her car. Mengxiang, with a loving smile on her face, continued to drive all the way, tightly holding her husband's gift in her hands. After some time, she arrived at the interview site with a new pharmacist, where contracts and various company products had already been prepared. The girl tried her best to persuade the potential employee because it was actually difficult to persuade him to cooperate. She, as the director of the company, guaranteed that their formula was completely unique and would certainly be successful, and production had already been launched. So the girl brought samples to the pharmacist so that he could see the quality for himself. Sinner also explained that they got this formula absolutely by accident, so no one would be able to make an analog, and asked the man to think again. The pharmacist admitted that the formula that the girl mentioned interested him, but the problem was that it was absolutely secret. In fact, he thought it was ridiculous that the company was going to reveal such a rare formula to him. Xin was very surprised by such a remark from a potential employee and did not even find the words to respond to this. Then she decided to get up from the table and stated that in this case she would no longer insist. At that moment, Pharmacy stopped drinking his tea because he heard that same pleasant aroma from the jar that the main character gave to his wife. The man tried to inhale this wonderful smell as deeply as possible to verify its origin.